Yeah, that's good. Estimate 2 bags on number 6. Which is why we need to break up first.
As to this, we break up to this, we break up the course. Finally, short. We don't break for lunch. Today, no consequence.
Have to go by the clock in the room.
We stay in the
Downloading whatever it's called.
What was the number of the time again? Sorry. What was the reference number?
For this one?
Yeah. That's a D to say in support of
People.
Yeah. I just have lots of it open. Yeah, that's have the door. Then you have it open because I can't open documents.
I'll have it open as soon as
Well, it must be because the
Just say, can you find this? Can you find
my local distributor road looks a bit
I'm not going to have it open.
worse for where I follow.
Pick it up. That's the agenda.
Thanks for your read.
My mother got
My lord wishing to extend his license.
I barely could get to the church because it was just
Lord, really.
the buildings.
What did I say? I can't.
Buses.
I don't know if you copy you in. Yeah, to me.
You can send to you and you send it over.
Yeah, that's good.
They wants to push it to +12.
Well, it's like saying anything. Like pushed it, don't they? Once they get that.
Don't screen in Rangley, up the hill.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, no, he's spoken to me. I met him.
Yeah, chap. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going by the clock in the room today. It is 10 o'clock. Can I welcome you all to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee, which is one of 3 area-based committees of Dorset Council. Our area of remit covers the previous Purbeck and East Dorset areas. For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Tony Coombs, chairing the meeting today. And if I can introduce the officer team supporting us. We have Kim Cowell, who is Principal Planning Officer, Liz Adams, Planning Case Officer, Dee Mitsugori Curran, Planning Case Officer, Kari Woodridge, Planning Case Officer, Steve Savage from Dorset Highways, Phil Proud is our legal support, and Megan Rochester, our Committee Support Officer. So please be aware that the meeting is being live streamed and a copy of the recording will be available on the website after the meeting. And by attending this meeting, you do consent to being filmed. Can I please ask you to make sure that any technology is switched off or turned to silent, mainly mobile phones and laptop sounds, please. I also would like to thank the officers behind the scenes who are doing all the technical stuff to make today possible. And I'm very pleased to welcome members of the public to our meetings to listen to the debate and the decisions being taken today, and that you have the opportunity to address the committee directly in accordance with our procedures, which can be found on the website. I think at this point I'd like to say that this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting, and only those who have registered to speak will be allowed to address the committee during the appropriate period. So moving on to the main agenda, do I have any apologies for absence today, Megan?
Good morning, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor John Worth, Barry Gorringe, Julie Robinson and Mike Barron.
Thank you. Do I have any declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination by members of the committee? If something does become apparent, can you raise it when we get to that item, please? Agenda item 4 are the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of March. They have been circulated in advance and will be published on the website. Are members happy to accept them?
Agreed.
So moving on to public participation, just a little bit more detail. The first 3 members of the public, including any community or amenity group who have registered to speak for and against the application, and that includes the applicant or their representative, totaling 6 altogether, will be invited to address us. If the applicant or their representative registers to speak, then only the first 2 members of the public who wish to speak for the application may address the committee. MPs need to register in the same way and will count as one of the 6 speakers. Town and parish councils and ward members of Dorset Council who are not members of the committee who wish to address us will be allowed to speak, providing they have given due notice. And all requests to speak have to be registered with Democratic Services by 8:30 on Monday, the 3rd of April. And each speaker will be strictly limited to 3 minutes. And I will have to be quite tight on that today because we have 4 applications and 17 public speakers. So please help us to help you. So as I've just said, we have 4 applications. Have there been any requests for deferral or withdrawal?
Madam Chairman, no, there have been no requests for withdrawal or referral, deferral.
Thank you. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how we're going to run it this morning, I will invite the case officer to introduce their item. Members of the public, planning agents, applicants, town and parish councils who have registered to speak will be allowed to address us in the following order: public against an application, public in support, the applicant or agent, the town or parish council, and then the local member. Following the public participation section on each application, I will ask the officers if there are any salient points that they wish to clarify. I will then open up the debate to members for questions. At that point, there will be no further public intervention. And in order to run the meeting, may I request that members of the committee direct any remarks and questions through myself as chair, and I invite you to speak in turn. Please keep the microphones on mute, etc., etc., etc. You know the usual spiel, and also to use the desk microphones. At the end of the debate, following a recommendation that has been proposed and seconded, I will take a vote by a show of hands. The voting detail will be recorded in the minutes if 3 or more members make that necessary request. Otherwise, it will just give the outcome. So we will be moving now on to the applications, and due to the technology, there may be a short gap whilst presentations are loaded, and that is particularly pertinent to the first one, as we have got some video as part of the presentation, so that will take a little bit longer to load. Okay, so item 7 is PFUL 2022-3050, change of use of agricultural buildings at Battle Farm to Class B8, storage or distribution at Battle Farm through. Steve, can you take us through this?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Dear councillors, this presentation has 34 slides and includes some videos to assist members understanding the context. If I could ask you, please, to take a note of the slide number as we go on, just in case if you've got some questions, and it will be much quicker to find them. Also, as already suggested, due to the size of this file and videos, it might be taking some time to upload. I also need an update. Councillor Wolf has submitted a statement regarding this application after the officer report has been published and has agreed for me to relay this following statement to the members. Councillor Wolf has worked with the Parish Council in respect of this application and has expressed concerns that insufficient information has been received to enable proper consideration of the proposal. He supports the Parish Council's position on the application and has requested the submission of revised baseline traffic figures that are independently verifiable prior to the termination of this application. I will start with the presentation now. Application is for change of use of 6 agricultural buildings at Battle Farm to use to Class B8 storage or distribution. The site is located within a rural location in Thrube, southwest of Bear Regis. The application site is located outside of the Breakers Paddle settlement area and outside of the Pinner Valley Conservation Area, is shown on this slide. The brown mustard-coloured land to the north, it's the Aitchen Woodland, site of nature conservation interest. To the south, and approximately 400 metres, here hatched in green, it's the Turner's Paddle Heat exercise area. The site is located to the east of Throop Hollow, which is the D road, which runs through Throop and Brown Paddle. The site is approximately 1.57 hectares in size and is accessed by approximately 300 metres long private drive, which is also shared with two other properties, the bungalow and the Throop Hollow Farm. Both properties are in ownership of the applicant. There are 6 poultry sheds on the site with hard standing between them and a large area of hard standing to the east. The site is on a hillside. The land on which the buildings are seated is slightly lower than the site entrance to the east, but also to the south, as the land slopes down towards the north. This aerial photograph shows the poultry barns and the table provided approximate measurements. The proposal is to convert 6 buildings for either storage or distribution or both purposes. All of the buildings are large. Each building will be capable of accommodating commercial or private storage or distribution uses. This slide shows plan view and elevations of existing agricultural buildings. No external changes to the buildings are proposed, and it is proposed to utilise all existing levels in site. Building 1 represents a more modern addition to the former poultry farm, and it is the largest building on the site at approximately 2,639 square metres. Photograph 6, here in the middle, clearly show the building is slightly sunk into the hillside to the south. Building 6 is of a similar size, 537 square metres, and design as buildings 2, 3, and 4. It's got its opening to the north, facing north, and has a large amount of hard surface around the building. The rest of the buildings, 2 to 5, are smaller, but still range between 475 and 535 square metres of internal floor space. There is a large hard surface yard at the front of building 5, as shown on photo B. There is ample hard surfacing to accommodate vehicle parking associated with the uses. Photo A shows the hard surface area east of the building 1, which is proposed to accommodate HGV parking, and photo B shows a hard surface area east of the building 6, which is proposed to accommodate vehicle parking. Photograph C just shows both areas together. There is 26 parking spaces proposed for the future staff and customers provided on existing hard standing east of building 6. And 3 HGV parking spaces will be provided on the existing hard standing east of building 1. It is anticipated that development could employ approximately 0.25 full-time employees, part-time employees equivalent to 1/4 of the full-time post. For maintenance, upkeep, and general management, however, development will provide an opportunity for tenant businesses to employ people to manage their storage distribution business. The site also allows for turning and manoeuvring for large vehicles. Subject to a condition 3 in Office report, storing parking and turning area for those using the storage distribution facilities and subject to compliance with the traffic management statement. The proposal is compliant with policy IAC and improving accessibility and transport of a perfect local plan, and there will be no unacceptable impact on highway safety. Photos A and B show the route into the site, and you can just about see the eastern elevation of the bungalow, the residential property. Photos C and D show the route out of the site. Concerns have been raised by nearby residents regarding the overall disturbance from noise, light and pollution arising from the proposed use of the site. The most vulnerable dwellings are those seated along the shared access with the application site, the bungalow immediately to the east and further to the east of the site with the Through Hollow Farm, both in applicant ownership. The site benefits from an existing unrestricted agricultural use with no restrictions on scale, timing or frequency of vehicle movement or hours of operation within the site. The proposed B8 use, storage or distribution of 6 buildings is of a different character to the existing poultry use. It will introduce access by multiple users and it is judged reasonable and necessary to restrict the business hours to the new site. Condition 7 on page 27. And in that way, control the hours of use of the access tract other than trips associated with the bungalow and the Through Hollow Farm. And also a potential for disturbance, notwithstanding that these are currently unrestricted for the farming operation. Furthermore, it is anticipated that the change of use of the units from agricultural storage or distribution units would be associated with some improvements to the nearby residential amenities through the reduction in farm odour and external lighting conditions, condition 8, page 28. There is no other residential properties in close proximity to the site. It is recognised that the potential increase in AGV movement through Brainpuddle to the west and up the Bear Regis to the east could result in additional noise and disturbance for local residents. But again, with the imposition of the condition to control opening hours, it is judged that the proposal is unlikely to significantly and demonstrably harm neighbouring amenities when compared to the lawful agricultural use of the site. The cessation of the poultry use is associated with localised environmental benefits arising from the reduction in ammonia and nitrogen emissions. During the course of the application, the proposal for parking place has been introduced to the scheme. This will result in the loss of a section of the verge, so a biodiversity survey has been carried out and submitted by the Diversity Plan has been certified by the Dorset Natural Environment Team. The Diversity Plan confirms that there will be no impact on biodiversity as a result of the provision of the proposed parking place. A biodiversity plan also secures additional biodiversity enhancement through the installation of a bat box on a suitable tree within the site. Also, a sympathetic lighting scheme to avoid harm to bats can be secured, condition 8. The amended tree report has been reviewed by the DC tree officer, who has confirmed that subject to conditions, the proposed passing place on Through Hollow can be accommodated without harm to the tree roofing area, conditions 11 and 12. The site benefits from tree and hedge screening, although glimpsed view can be possible. Glimpsed views are possible from the southwest from public right-of-way. The site is not visible from the Through Hollow highway. Concerns have been raised by objectors that the proposed storage distribution use would be associated with noise, light and traffic, which will be harmful to the character of the area. Due to the relatively discrete nature of the site, conditions limiting operation hours and controlling external lighting would avoid demonstrable harm to the character of the area, conditions 7 and 8. The proposal is anticipated to result in an increase in traffic movement, but when compared to the existing lawful agricultural use, significant harm to the environment has not been identified. In addition to concerns regarding the impact on the character of the area and neighbouring amenities. The other major objections raised to the proposal are that the location lacks the necessary highway infrastructure to serve the proposed storage distribution use. The size of the vehicles and on site and using the surrounding country lanes. An increase in traffic associated with the use will result in danger for road users like pedestrians, horse riders, school, children, cyclists, etc. Impact on the environment, visually and ecologically, arising from significantly increased traffic movement. The officer's report assesses these concerns and explains why officers have decided to recommend approval for this proposal. The next selection of slides just provides some additional visual details to assist your assessment. In relation to highways, as we can see from this slide, the site is located in a rural area which is largely served by unclassified roads which have verges but no pavement. The site is accessed by an agricultural track which runs westwards from the public highway through Hollow. The public highway comprises a single track country lane with no formal parking places. It is used by vehicles as well as pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders and provides access to the public rights of way to the south, which runs through the Turners Puddle Heath. The application is accompanied by a transport statement and an additional highway technical note demonstrating the likely trip rate arising from the proposed use. Although the Parish Council has rejected the conclusions of the submitted transport statement, officers consider that the trip rates appropriately reflect operations that could lawfully take place on the site from a planning perspective. The Council's Highways team has confirmed that information submitted in a transport statement and additional technical notes, including trips data, is appropriate for this proposal. Highway danger is a significant concern in the majority of the objections received by the Council against this application, but the Council's Highways team have not identified any significant increase in highway danger from the proposed use compared to the lawful use of agriculture. The edge use can be associated with heavy goods vehicles, and it was recognised that the road running through Throop and Brian's Puddle is a B road with no pavement. The nearest B road is B3390, approximately 2.5 kilometres to the west. The existing private access track has been judged appropriate to serve the proposed use. It has been used by heavy goods vehicles when operating as a poultry unit and has sufficient width as shown in the swept path analysis within a submitted traffic statement. As an increase in HGV traffic is anticipated to result from the development, the applicant proposes to widen the section of B road to a width of 5.5 metres as works ancillary to this planning application and shown on this slide. The proposed passing place to be secured by condition 4 is of sufficient length and width to allow two HGVs to pass alongside each other according to the manual of the street. The area of road to be widened would improve overall highway safety for all users, not just those accessing Clapham Farm. This is deemed by the Highways team to be sufficient in scale for the required and intended purpose, and it is not of a scale which will encourage high-speed driving. It is recognised that the lack of pedestrian refuge means that pedestrians using the local highways, including those walking to school or waiting to catch bus, will experience the effects of any additional traffic movement, but highway safety would not automatically be compromised by the proposal. The Council's highway team has considered the site access and internal layout, as well as the proposal to impact the site safety and effective operation of the local highway network. They have raised no objection on the basis that the unfettered agricultural baseline prevents them from objecting to a use which would not increase trip rates to such a degree to warrant reason for refusal. The highway officer confirmed that they would not support additional HGV movement throughout the village and could not support traffic movements travelling south along Throop Hollow towards 835 located to the northeast. In response to the highway officer's comments, the applicant has submitted a traffic management statement setting out a package of measures to be employed as part of the proposal. This specifies how the suggested measures can be implemented and enforced and includes details of an improved parking place as already mentioned on the previous slide. For incoming traffic, it is proposed that the applicant verbally brief all contractors, tenants, employees, and any other visitors prior to their arriving on the preferred route, advising on the preferred route to the south, and describing the unsuitability of the road network immediately north of Battle Farm. For the outgoing traffic, in order to effectively direct traffic along the preferred route by turning right out of the farm entrance heading south, the applicant is proposing to erect 2 descriptive signs at the locations shown on this slide. Officers recognise that it would not be reasonable or enforceable to impose a condition which prevents vehicles exiting the site from travelling north, since it is an unrestricted public highway and traffic cannot be constantly monitored. Instead, the application is supported by a traffic management plan which requires measures to effectively direct traffic along the preferred routes away from Battle Farm. Council's highway team are satisfied that proposed measure will make the development acceptable in relation to highway safety. Officers are satisfied that proposed measure will assist in diverting traffic away from the most sensitive residential dwellings in Bryant, Puddle and Throop. With conditions in place to encourage the diverting of traffic movements away from the villages and improving the parking place within the Throop Hollow, the council's highway team are satisfied that the proposal would not result in harm to users of the highway. Conditions 4, 5 and 6. To assist members understanding the site context, the following slides include photographs and videos of the local road network relevant to this application. So on this slide, you can see the junction, which is from east coming to the Bear region, south goes to Bollington, and north is going towards the site and through. So the first video is driving along Sea Road from Bear Regis, then left onto Throop Hollow. I just hope it works. So you can see some natural sort of informal parking places along this route, which obviously happen with the current traffic. So we're now turning right to the Throop Hollow. So that was this road, coming this way and then turning into the Throop Hollow. The next slide, it will be coming from the opposite direction, so from east, again towards the same junction and then turning left towards Throop Hollow. Coming towards the junction now. Turning left to Troop Hollow. So the next slide, video, it's driving along Troop Hollow, south-north section of the highway with informal parking places on the site. It's not going to, this video is going to stop before the entrance to the site. It's going to stop just about there. The next video is continuation from where it stopped, driving off along the Hollow, turning west on the private drive up to the entrance of the site. So we're approaching the entrance of the site, taking left and entering the private drive. You can see to the left, it's coming the Troop Hollow Farm residential property. And to the right, we're coming towards the bungalow. And now you can have a view of some of the buildings, building 1 and 6. So the next video is the preferred route coming out of the site. So it's end of the drive, private drive, turning right, so back to the junction with Road C. This is where it's the preferred traffic to go away from the site rather than going left to the village. So it's catching up a bit. And just approaching the junction. The next video, it is the road going left from the site. So this is what we're trying to avoid. So this video is going to stop at this junction in through. It's going downhill. This is just a still of that junction. So you can see photograph A showing private road, photograph B showing the road that we just came from the north or south towards north, and then this is photograph C. It's the road going to west to Brian's Puddle. On the next slide, we have now gone to the other side of Brian's Puddle, to the junction with Sea Road, and this video is going to take us all the way through. This is the last and the longest video, but it's taken us all the way to Brian's Puddle, through all the way to the entrance of the site. Also, just to mention that these videos are very fresh and they're only done on Monday, so pretty much what it is at the moment. So this one is a bit long, but it's a long route. So we're coming down to the junction that we previously stopped in the middle of the route, and then we're going to take a sharp corner and going up the hill towards the entrance of the street. Just coming up now. So to conclude, policy CEO supports the reuse of buildings in the countryside for employment use, provided that they do not result in a significant adverse impact on the environment, visually, ecologically, or from traffic movement. Overall, the benefits of continued economic and social roles of the site through diversification, the support of a resilient business sector and generation of job opportunities and some local air quality improvements associated with the species of chicken farming is judged to outweigh the potential harm arising from additional vehicle trips on the network associated with the proposed B8 users. Subject to the conditions set out on pages 26 to 29 within the officer report, approval is recommended in this presentation.
Thank you very much, Steve. Quite a comprehensive presentation, and I think it's the first time we've had video, and it has been very helpful. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to now move on to our area of time of public speaking. We have 8 speakers this morning on this application. So, as I said, the objectors first. The first one is Henry Hogger. Good morning, sir. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Have you been shown how to use the microphone?
I can work it. Thank you. Morning. Planning issues can be emotional, especially when a community feels that its way of life is threatened. And I think 91 objections on the file shows that this tends to be the case here. The decisions are taken on the basis of logic and reasoned argument. So I'll highlight 3 areas which I believe show up the shortcomings of this application in clarity, logic, and sustainability. First, the intended use, the application of the B8, storage or distribution. It doesn't specify which nor what commodity is to be stored or distributed. What's more, in reply to the question whether there are to be any commercial or industrial activity or processes, the applicant ticks no. It's hard to see what benefit for a storage or distribution operation if it can't be commercial or industrial, nor what use to the local businesses who are offered use of the premises on site if they can't carry out commercial activity. Secondly, the issue of increased traffic is key to many of the objections, as the planning officer said, and we'll hear more about that from other speakers. Suffice it to say here that the baseline figure quoted in the application of 95 potential daily vehicle movements under the current agricultural operating licence is spurious. Evidence from those who remember the poultry farm in its heyday suggests a maximum of 25 to 30 movements. Since that operation anyway ceased many years ago, the correct baseline figure is near to 0, compared with the maximum of 154 daily vehicle movements quoted as likely under the current application. This is hardly a, quote, slight increase, unquote. Lastly, on conservation, under the heading Biodiversity and Geological Conservation, the applicant ticks no to the question whether any designated conservation site is adjacent or near to the site. In fact, as the Dorset Wildlife Trust and others have pointed out, and as we've heard from the planning officer, the site is adjacent to a site of nature conservation interest and only a few hundred metres away from at least one site of special scientific interest at Turner's Puddle Heath. Many of the single track roads leading to the main highway network run alongside the SSSI itself, putting protected wildlife at risk from wheel tracks and pollution caused by heavy vehicles. All these concerns lead me to support the fears of the parish council and many individual parishioners that this flawed and unsatisfactory application risks harming the character of our tranquil rural community and its conservation area. In all logic and in all conscience, the only option today for this committee is refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogger. Bang on your 3 minutes. That's how it's done, folks. You'd like to return to your seats. My next speaker is Trevor Poole.
This is a large built site, but it's let down by its access roads, which are poorly constructed, sub 4 metre wide country lanes running in all directions for a couple of kilometres to better class roads. They were great 100 years ago, but not now. And I do think your videos didn't show the worst parts of them. Hence, I believe it's an unsustainable location for storage use of the scale proposed, which is inconsistent with the accessibility of the rural location. Local people know that the chicken farm previously operated with 25 daily vehicle movements at its peak, which is 70 less than being portrayed to you, a far greater impact. Your officers tell you in their report that B8 use has not been further defined, hence it follows that no one knows the maximum traffic flow that will occur. You're being asked to make a decision based on deficient key information. I and my family walk, cycle and drive our horses and carriages along all the access roads to the site with our children and grandchildren and friends up to 4 or 5 times per week. My wife rides her horse in a group with others and frequently meets friends along the narrow roads from as far afield as Blandford, Wareham, Morton and Bovington. It's a very active area for equines. 6 or 7 other local people also drive their carriages along these routes in order to access forestry land where all horses can be safely exercised off-road. During our trips out with the carriage, we were amazed to see significant numbers of other residents, tourists and visitors, young and old, exercising in the area and enjoying the open access and network of public rights of ways which are interlinked by these narrow lanes. We joke that sometimes our carriage drives are more of a social event, but the darker side is that we are vulnerable road users and we can also recount many near misses, even on these quiet roads, at the hands of inconsiderate drivers of both cars and agricultural vehicles. I am fearful that there are no planning conditions proposed to give us protection or to limit the traffic numbers and routing. HGVs can in fact drive where they like and are not legally restricted to any preferred route. The proposed traffic and planning conditions are toothless to safeguard us and other vulnerable users. They offer no benefit to the community of local people, which with 7-day operating times gives us no respite from the negative traffic effects. The planning conditions clearly do not pass the NPPF test of reasonableness. The scale of this proposal, the incorrect traffic-based data, the lack of information about future leases, or of any reasonable way to control trip rates and routing, and no provision to give the community respite means that the proposal will result in greater intensity of use than the extant but dormant poultry farm. This will result in harm to the character and amenity of the countryside and the conservation area. 91 objectors, the parish council and the adjacent residents have all lodged strong and reasonable objections. Please listen to the local people who are telling you that this will harm their way of life. Please refuse this application.
Thank you very much. My third speaker is Adam Bennett.
Morning to you members. Existing use, as you've heard, comprises 5,190 square metres of egg production, with proposals to change all of this to an unspecified and generally unrestricted Class BA storage and distribution use. This is a substantial quantum of floor space and is capable of giving rise to a substantial number of vehicular movements, and typically this type of use will be directed to one of the district's major employment sites. Policies E and ELS of the permit local plan confirm that new employment sites should be directed to the most sustainable locations, and importantly, in rural areas, small-scale employment uses will be encouraged to improve rural regeneration and to contribute towards the sustainability of rural communities. This proposal is directly contrary to these aims. It's not small-scale, and it definitely won't support rural regeneration or sustainability. The development is intensive. It's significantly traffic generating in an unsustainable location, only perpetuating more vehicular movements along the network. Your officer's report accepts the proposal is not small scale and is substantial. It is a matter of principle contrary to policy. Policy CO of the plan confirms that when considering proposals for reuse of buildings in the countryside, the primary aim is to improve rural sustainability and make a positive contribution to landscape and biodiversity, and most significantly, that the development should not give rise to an impact on the environment from traffic movements. The reuse of buildings is not acceptable in principle for any purposes. The impacts must be considered, and in this case, the traffic impacts will be significant both visually and environmentally. Proposed use will give rise to a dramatic increase of vehicular movements. The applicant declared clearly when the substantial shed was granted on site in 2006, there were 7 employees on site within the full poultry enterprise in thriving use. The applicant also declared a total of 8 vehicles entered and left the site daily, in addition to those employee movements, a total of 30 movements daily when the operation was at its most intensive. Proposed use the applicant has submitted may result between 85 and 154 movements daily, with many more HGV movements possible and likely. There is no evidence how these would safely access the site. This is a rural location with rural roads, and the highways officer has confirmed any access must be from the south to avoid impact on the villages. You've seen from the videos this morning how narrow the roads are from a hatchback vehicle, not a HGV. The roads to the south are further narrowed. And the most obvious route from the A35 to the east by Yearlings Drove from Bear Regis is signposted as unsuitable for HGV vehicles. The highways officer asked for a description of a safe route from the A35 to the site. This hasn't been provided. Your office has acknowledged that the use proposed has not been defined and would have the potential to give rise to significant vehicular trip rates. Officers also state that whilst the proposals would reuse existing buildings, this is an isolated location which weighs against the scale of the operation proposed. Their exact words. The scheme proposed is inappropriate, it is unsustainable, and it is contrary to policies LD, E and CO of the plan.
Bennett, I'm going to have to stop you there. You're over top. I did say I'd be strict this morning.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, I'm now going to move on to my next batch of public speakers, and the first one is Andrew Tregay. Have I pronounced it right?
Yes, I'm going to speak first. Okay.
I've got you down as my first speaker. The chair is yours.
Members, as you can see from your officer's report and their briefing this morning, the application is recommended for approval and benefits from no technical objections from your professional officers. I wanted to touch upon the policy element of the proposals, predominantly the principle of development, and reiterate your officer's support for the application. Policy CO of your adopted local plan allows for the reuse of rural buildings in the countryside for employment uses, such as the proposed B8. This is subject to there being no significant adverse impact on the environment, visually, ecologically, or from traffic movements. And as with all change, there is a degree of impact, both positive and negative. However, the policy expressly stipulates a significant adverse impact, which is, of course, a high benchmark. This, therefore, is the test that your officers have rightly and diligently considered and concluded that the proposals pass. Environmentally and ecologically, the proposed change will remove an intensive poultry use, reducing the amount of ammonia and nitrogen emissions the site is capable of producing. I note that Natural England and your environmental officers have not raised an objection. Dorset Wildlife Trust do not believe there'll be any impact on the local wildlife sites. Visually, the buildings are already in existence and are not proposed to change in any significant way. As has been stated within the submissions, changes to modern agricultural legislation have rendered the buildings no longer fit for purpose, and such their reuse will ensure their long-term maintenance. My colleague, Mr. Culhane, will provide more detail from a technical highways perspective. However, it's noted there's no objection from your highways officers, and planning officers are content that there's no significant adverse impact from vehicular movements. It is therefore clear that the principle of the proposed development is acceptable. It is also worth noting the general aims and objectives of the local plan and of Dorset Council as a whole, who seek to encourage economic growth. This is especially relevant in this time of national economic uncertainty, with the country on the cusp of recession. Planning needs to be adaptive and allow the evolution of land and buildings to meet modern needs. I note the opening paragraph to your economic growth strategy, which seeks to encourage the creation of new sustainable businesses, the growth of existing businesses, and to attract new businesses to the area. This is supported by adopted planning policies such as CO, which are positively worded, looking to support growth rather than limit it. National planning policy is also positively worded to promote growth and support business development. Paragraph 81 of the NPPF states significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and activity. The applicant has gone to great lengths to satisfy the requests from officers, and this has led to no objections from any technical consultee. As your officer concludes, the proposals can be satisfactorily regulated through conditions, and that overall the proposals comply with the adopted local plan. There are no technical or policy reasons to refuse the application. It is therefore respectfully requested that planning permission is granted as per your officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd like to return to the seat. So my next speaker then is Nick Culhane. If you'd like to come and take it.
Chair, my name is Nick Culhane. I'm an independent highway consultant. My background is I was 33 years at Winchester City Council as principal engineer and 8 years at Hampshire County Council as senior engineer. So I know a little bit of background from both the private and public sector. But today I'm obviously representing my client. And the historical use of this wasn't a production site. There seems to be a little bit of difference between the suggested traffic generation contained in my report opposed to that from the objectors. We're going by the data that was given to us by the previous operator, and that is the data that's been accepted by the Highway Authority. We've used TRIPS data to predict the likely traffic impact from the proposed development, and TRIPS data is the national accepted database which is used for predicting traffic generation. And using this data, we've established that there's two scenarios. One is for commercial warehousing, and one is for self-storage. The former would generate around 8 traffic movements in the AM peak, and the latter in 3 in the AM peak. But the highway officer has gone on the worst case scenario. So we undertook a 7-day traffic survey in a neutral month. We established that True Hollow generated an average of 99 weekday traffic movements throughout a 12-hour day. So I think, based on that and looking at the videos that were shown to us, I think I'm right in saying that we only saw one additional vehicle on the whole road network today, and one pedestrian to the north of the site, which is on an area of highway that we're not actually intending to use. We've undertaken a review of the accident situation for a kilometres radius within of the site, and over the last 5 years there's just been one slight casualty. So that suggests to me that the highway network is actually operating in a safe and efficient manner, and there's no overarching accident situation. So the Highway Authority have carefully considered our data. They did initially ask us for some clarification, so we produced a further technical note where we broke down the actual traffic generation across the whole day, taking into account the existing traffic that we recorded on the route network, and added the proposed traffic from our development.
Mr. Colhane, you've come to the end of your 3 minutes. Can you just finish your sentence, please?
All I would say, Chairman, is the Highway Authority supports our development. Thank you.
Very much. My next speaker is George Whitaker.
The slide's already on. Do I need to press it again?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Morning, Chair. I'm George Whitaker, agent for and on behalf of the applicant. You've heard from Nick Colhane, our highways consultant, and Andrew Chigay, our head of planning at Simmons & Sampson. The site in question includes a series of older buildings which utilised a battery cage lane system, and a more modern building granted permission in 2006, utilising a colony cage system. The EU banned battery cage lane systems in 2012, and production in the old buildings ceased. In June 2021, the European Parliament voted to ban the use of any form of caged egg production in the very near future, rendering the buildings in their current agricultural configuration as redundant. The proposed use is that of B8 storage or distribution. A B8 use in this instance is the best possible suitable alternative and least impactful change of use to utilise the redundant buildings. It will greatly reduce the amount of nitrates, ammonia and phosphates coming from site, and will be achieved in a low-key manner in terms of visual impact. The application is for a specific use, i.e. use class B8, not a specific user or business to occupy those buildings. Nick produced a transport statement in March last year based on previous traffic movements at the site as a baseline. These figures were provided to us by a long-term senior employee working at a management level for the previous owners of the buildings. To quote the officer's report at point 15.23, the trip rates are considered to represent a reasonable baseline, and officers consider that the trip rates appropriately reflect operations that could lawfully take place on the site from a planning perspective. Nick's statement was followed by a technical note in response to the parish council concerns. The conclusion was that the access to the site would provide a safe and suitable access for all users, and the traffic generated by the development could be safely accommodated on the local highway network without creating a severe impact. I then worked with Dorset Council Highways to create a passing place scheme to improve the local road network, not only for users of the site, but for all road users, Dorset Council Highways team have no objection to the proposed development. In fact, none of the statutory consultees, to include Highways, Minerals and Waste, Natural England, nor Dorset Wildlife Trust, have objected to the proposals. Over the past 12 months or so, the Council's technical officers have rigorously investigated all relevant factors making up the pros and cons of the application and have, on balance, recommended approval. I ask that the committee trust the considered opinion of their statutory consultees, have confidence in the opinions of their expert officers, take decisions based on planning policy and not popularity, and to enable planning permission to be granted, given that there are no technical objections. Thank you.
Nicely inside your time. My next speaker is Vice Chairman of the Parish Council, Councillor David Newdegg.
It will not have escaped many councillors' attention that this application is in many ways very similar to the Gaunts Common application, which you refused at your meeting last September. Like that application, this application also lacks any detailed proposals as to what the site will actually be used for, with no indication of the balance between storage and distribution activities or how the site will be operated. This means that there can be little certainty on what the potential benefits might be or the extent of substantial harm that the proposal may cause. We therefore consider that it is not unreasonable for councillors to err on the side of caution in making their decision today. Our principal concern is the potential harm caused by the increase in both the quantity of daily vehicle movements and the larger size of vehicles accessing the site. We're grateful for the videos to be shown because these are the very areas that we're most concerned about. The Highways Authority concludes that the daily traffic movements could amount to a 62% increase compared with the maximum hypothetical number of movements that the current planning application status of the site might generate, even though the application itself states that such a use is no longer feasible. The reality, as you've heard, is that the actual vehicle movements will be over 400% higher than what was in the old poultry farm. There does not appear to have been any detailed consideration of how lorries will be able to access the site either to or from any sort of main road. From the top of Throop Hollow, HGVs will have to drive along one of 3 totally unsuitable single-track lanes with a maximum width of about 4 metres. Bird Route does have some informal passing places, but on the weekends and during the summer months, these are regularly occupied by families visiting the area to park their cars before going walking or cycling. They cannot be relied upon to be available for large vehicles to pass. You can see from the video why the Parish Council believes that the intensification of traffic and size of vehicles on narrow country lanes will fundamentally alter the nature of the place in which we live. Many thousands of people visit the area every year to enjoy its peace and tranquility. They come from all over the country to access the extensive rights-of-way networks for cycling, walking, horse riding, and they see these country lanes as part of a recreational network. This could potentially have an adverse impact on tourism spend in the area. Local residents also fear that despite the assurances given by the applicant, there is a substantial risk of vehicles inadvertently trying to access the site either through the villages of Browns and Throop or along other unsuitable lanes. We do not consider that the proposed condition allowing use of the site for 7 days a week throughout the year in any way limits the significant harm caused to users' enjoyment of the surrounding countryside. In conclusion, we believe that the economic benefits have been overstated and the environmental and public safety harm arising from highway issues is substantial and cannot be mitigated by loosely worded conditions. Thank you for listening.
Very much. I have one last speaker, and that's the local ward member, Peter Wharf.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, members. I'm here as the local ward member, and I also represent the views of my other local ward member, Councillor Beddoe. We divide our parishes into 2, and we have lots of them. And I go to the Asphodel and Bryansborough Parish Council meeting every month and have done for about 8 years. I'm very, very familiar with this application and its history. I've had very, very frequent conversations with the officers, and I thank you for your help there. I've sent a detailed response, which I'm not going to go through again. I have a number of concerns. The parish do not agree the baseline figures. The parish do not agree much of the analysis. I would remind you that it is a balanced finding. The parish do not feel that they've been engaged. Why would you get 91 people out of a population of 200 or something? I'm absolutely in favour of agricultural diversification, but I don't believe this meets that requirement. I would just make a couple of comments on the video, because the video was very interesting. I hadn't seen it before. It was from a car and not from an HGV, and therefore gave a very misleading feeling of the width of the roads. And if you go along them, you will find they're rather thinner than the appearance there. So you need to be a bit careful about that. The phrase informal passing place is not a highways phrase that I'm familiar with, and most of you would not try your cars on those informal passing places, because in the winter they're very boggy and in the summer they're rock hard, and either way you're going to do damage to your cars. I think there is significant danger, and there was a suggestion that the additional traffic would not provide this. I think there's a significant additional danger to school children, pedestrians, recreational walkers and horse riders, of which there are a lot around there, and it is a very, very tourist area. My paper to the officers suggested that you should defer in order to try and get what I believe to be meaningful engagement with the parish council, particularly in terms of getting highways figures and other figures that the parish council can feel that they agree with. However, if you choose not to defer and have to make a decision between approval or refusal, I would request that you refuse this, because it is inappropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. So that is the end of our public speaking. Could someone turn the mic off, please? Thank you. Okay, so we've had quite a lot of public opinion. Are there any points that officers want to come back on before I move on to member debate? Steve, our highways guru.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Steve Savage. I'm the Council's Transport Development Manager, representing the Highway Authorities, the statutory, can't say that, with the consultancy and the planning system. Obviously, lots of issues here with regards to highways and traffic generation. I think it's a very fair point that Councillor Wolf and I think it was Mr. Hogger and the gentleman after him, Mr. Paul, raised with regards to the baseline traffic data. The stance that we've taken as a highway authority is that we've got an agricultural use on the site. It's an unfettered agricultural use. The applicant has provided some data which they claim is valid, which indicates that a poultry farm took place and that was the level of traffic that they anticipated or experienced at the time. As an authority, we can take that on board as be a representative and a fair indication of what did happen. But the important point here is that we're looking at this as an existing unfettered agricultural use, which could generate traffic of an agricultural nature on the network, i.e. slow-moving tractors, large agricultural vehicles and the like. So in carrying out our assessment on the application, we've looked at the worst case scenario here. We've considered that the use class that's being proposed is one that could have self-storage use, which is a higher traffic generator than an ordinary commercial warehouse use. Just on that basis, the applicant was asked to provide additional figures, and as we heard from Mr. Bullhane, he provided a TRIPS analysis of that use, of the commercial warehouse use. Now, it was on the network. There's no way I could ever sit in front of you all here and say there won't be more trips on the network. There will be. The issue here is, are those trips at the level that we feel that we could recommend a refusal on highway safety or capacity terms? Now, the applicant had an ATC, an automatic traffic counter, just to the south of the access to establish some baseline figures on the daily movements. And as you know, when we tend to look at traffic movements, we look at the AM and PM peaks, the movements in the AM between 8 and 9, and the movements in the PM between 5 and 6. Now, the actual existing traffic along there from the ATC indicated that in the mornings we'd have 6 two-way movements. That's three up, 3 out, if you like. And in the afternoon, the 5 to 6, there'd be 8 two-way movements. If we then add on the worst case scenario, i.e. the self-storage warehouse, we'd be looking at 14 in the morning, over double, and 11 in the afternoon period. Okay, now these aren't tablets of stone, these are predictions. You can't hold me to these figures. This gives us an indication of what we're likely to see. So an effective doubling, if you like, of the movements from the site, from the south up to Battle Farm, and we're looking at perhaps a 40% increase in the afternoon period. Now, and that isn't all HGVs. That's the important point I'd like to make here. We can try and predict the number of HGVs. It's very difficult for self-storage, and we had the same discussion at Gaunt's Common site. We could generally say you have about 33% of movements with the HGVs. So in the morning, you could be getting an additional 1 or 2 HGVs, and in the evening peak period, you could get an additional HGV. It's on this basis that we've come to our conclusion that we felt we couldn't actually recommend a refusal for this application. Now, the control mechanism's been raised. The case officer showed you the signage that the applicant was proposing at the exits of the site, which was suggesting that HGVs wouldn't be turning left up through Bryant's Puddle. We haven't suggested that on highway safety grounds, but I think it was evident from the video that the majority of the actual route through Bryant Puddle was relatively wide, and that vehicles could pass. Even when vehicles were parked on the carriageway, other vehicles could pass. And this has historically been utilised by agricultural vehicles, large, slow-moving agricultural vehicles. We recommended that you shouldn't have a left turn on environmental and amenity grounds, because we felt that there was a suitable route to the south, which would then go on the C-class road and then distribute traffic through onto the strategic network. I think it might have been Councillor Wolf mentioned, or an objector mentioned, that we previously requested that the routes to the main strategic network were provided. We haven't received that information, but it's self-evident if they're travelling south, where they're going to be going, if they're going to the east or the west. That's why we haven't had that. So the control mechanism, it is advisory. You're quite correct that we can't enforce that. We couldn't enforce or put a condition on saying that they must always turn right out of the site. We have the assurance of the developer or the applicant that movements will be restricted. We can do nothing more on this. It's best endeavours on the part of ourselves as a highway authority, on yourself as a planning authority, and on the operator to adhere to that. We hope they would. The roads network serving the site, I think this is the final point I need to make, it's typical of Dorset roads. We all live in Dorset, we all like the rural nature of Dorset, and particularly in the area around Bryant's Puddle, down to Bovington. They are typical, beautiful Dorset roads. Now, the nature of Dorset roads is they can tend to be narrow. We do have a council of also informal passing places, which I probably wouldn't want to take my car on a lot of occasions, but they do operate on an informal basis, and they've been formed by vehicles overrunning the highway verge generally. But this is typical of the network until they get onto the main strategic network itself. Is the level of traffic generated by this on an hourly basis sufficient that we could say that's of a danger, that they're going to be creating more damage, that the passing place isn't required? The advice I'm giving you is no. I do not feel that there are any sustainable highway safety or capacity reasons that we can say no. It certainly doesn't tick the box as far as I can determine from the NPPF in terms of severity. So the recommendation we've given, Chairman, is one of no objection, subject to conditions. I would just say that we don't support the application. We don't have any objection to it because that's why we made conditional approval. So obviously answer any other questions. Hopefully that's addressed some of the points that have been raised. Thank you.
I'll come back to the planners. Is there anything else you wish to add at this stage? Not everything. No. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to the members of the planning committee, and my first speaker is Bill Tribe.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The local Dorset Council member, Councillor Worf, with the support of the other local ward member, Councillor Beddoe, advocated deferral of this proposal for, I think I'm right in quoting him, for more meaningful engagement with the parish council and in order to seek agreement on statistical data that we've heard and I think there is a certain amount of conflict in that in relation to that statistical data. Procedurally, I believe we should take that proposal for deferral first, and on the basis of what Councillor Wharf has said and his support by his colleague Councillor Beddoe, I would certainly like to move that deferral in order that the committee can take a view and either indeed defer or then move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Michael. Thank you. Alex, you're my next speaker. Do you wish to second the proposal?
If you mean second the proposal to defer. Yeah. Yes, I would second that proposal. There is confusion, disagreement about what basic line figures we're going for. What I would like is some actual more information on the environmental impacts, like an air quality control monitoring scheme. We know that it's not just traffic causing a danger to people and cars, it's also a danger to extra traffic, causing damage to the local environment. This is an environment which is not, I won't say pristine, nothing in Dorset is pristine, whatever we think, but it is a fairly undamaged ecosystem of verges and hedges. And I'm not sure if we can get any more information on the effect on those of having extra nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide fumes dropped in this area at a time when we have called it a climate emergency. I think we should be extra careful on our monitoring before we increase traffic. And one question that to the officers, yeah, if you don't mind, is when did the egg production on this farm stop? Because when in the report it talks about there will be a biodiversity or environmental improvement. Well, if it already stopped 2 or 3 years ago, then that improvement has happened. And so we would be going down the slope, not up the slope. So that's my 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a few issues that both the speakers have raised. Do you want to respond to those, please?
Chair, thank you. In respect of the ecological issues, I fully appreciate your concern. I think that the problem is from a planning perspective, we have to consider that there is currently a legal, a lawful use of that site for agriculture. There may be other issues that prevent it being used, say for poultry, but it could be used for alternatives, and therefore the benefits from the reduction in ammonia. So at the moment, my understanding from what Mr. Whitaker just said was that caged farming ceased in 2012, and that colony cage farming only ceased more recently, and the site is currently redundant. But we have to consider the fact that this proposal would prevent it from the site from being used for agriculture in the future. And then in terms of the harm from additional pollution from traffic movements, and there are parts of Dorset area where Natural England raises issues about in relation to harm to protected areas, but in this case they haven't. So we don't have, as far as I'm aware, a reasonable basis on which to prevent the progress of this application on potential harm from emissions.
Yeah. Steve, did you want to come back on the traffic part of the proposal?
Madam Chair, the baseline traffic data, I think we might all get a bit hung up on the figures that were produced by the applicant. But what I was trying to make clear in my last statement was that we haven't based our assessment on those baseline figures. They have simply been provided by the applicant as an indication of the level of traffic they thought that have been generated previously by the site. As a highway authority, we, as I said, is working for the worst case scenario. We're looking at traffic likely to be generated by the self-storage warehouse. What impact does that have on the network? We're not carrying out a comparative exercise here, saying it did this, that was doing that. We're saying, what is the impact of that traffic from the self-storage warehouse on the network? So I take Councillor Tripe's point and Councillor Wolf's point in regards to whether we should be accepting the baseline data that the applicant's been provided. But what I'm saying to you is we haven't. It's given us a feel for what they think might have happened there. But we are saying to you, our baseline is there's an unfettered agricultural use on that site. This is the amount of traffic that we would predict, or we've confirmed with the applicant, for a self-storage warehouse. What is the impact of that traffic on the network? Is it something that we can accept or we should be refusing? The fact that we're only looking at relatively low levels, I think there's 8 movements in the AM peak from this site, 2 which might be HGVs, could be comparable to an agricultural use of the site. That's the comparison we're making. What could it do now as an agricultural use? What is it predicted to generate? So I feel that the baseline, it's been useful to have it, but we have not based our assessment on that.
You wish to come back, Bill?
Councillor Wharf also mentioned the need for more, I think I'm quoting him correctly, more meaningful engagement with the parish council. And as this committee knows, I've often attempted to gain more notice to be taken of what parish councils say, because they are the layer of local authority that is closest to the people. Consequently, I would also move this proposal for Councillor Wharf's point about better engagement with the parish council. But as far as the statistics are concerned, I understand what you're saying, but there are a lot of statistics that have been thrown around this morning, not all of which I think your remarks applied to.
All I was going to say, members, is that the role of this committee is to make a judgment based on the information before you. The applicants are entitled to submit applications to the council about engaging with the local community before they do so. And in this instance, you have an application that's supported by technical documents and other information, and you have been asked to make a decision based on that information. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to carry on with the debate for a bit longer. David Took, my next speaker.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of deferral, I'm not sure that particularly gets us anywhere. What we've had, it is discussions about traffic volumes, but we don't know. And with greatest respect to all concerned, they're all guesses because we do not know. The current traffic movements, interesting, but irrelevant because that whole dynamic would change if this was granted. So that doesn't make any real difference to the future. The application is including 26 parking spaces, which sort of implies they're expecting up to that number on site at any one time. There's quite a large number of people on site at any one time. And during the course, if they're only staying there for 20 minutes, an hour, that's a lot of movements that could be generated potentially. So they're clearly making space for this. But again, this is simply guesswork. I also have a concern about the road edges where you get increased traffic, and I think we'll agree there will be increased traffic. I have personal experience of very poorly edged roads in the island. Luckily for me, those roads are mainly Hampshire, not Dorset, so I don't get asked about it. But there's a D-class road which is served by a lot of traffic, and there's ruts a foot deep on either side of the road. You've got to be very careful. because when two vehicles are trying to pass, they go up onto the bridge, wear the sides down, they break the tarmac down at the side, and they wear deep ruts into the road. And that can increase danger of accidents and serious damage to vehicles, especially when a large agricultural or gravel or whatever lorry comes towards you, and you've got to dive out of the way because they ain't stopping. So I think there's more to this than simply numbers of vehicles. There's damage to roads. We've talked about passing places, but the rest of the road isn't wide enough for two vehicles to pass side by side, anything larger than a small car, two small cars. So there are concerns about that. And I think whereas NPPF Part 83 talks about making provisions for creative and high technology industries and for storage and distribution operations to a variety of scales, it does say in suitably accessible locations. And I'm currently not convinced, evidence notwithstanding, that this is a suitably accessible location based on potential number of vehicles, based on potential damage to the road, and based on the potential impacts to the people who live nearby. So in terms of deferral, I don't think we'd get anywhere by deferring. In terms of the application itself, I think I'd like to be a lot more convinced that the traffic situation is going to be unproblematic, and I don't think anyone can say it will be unproblematic. I'm sure there will be problems, but I'll wait and hear what people have got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robin Cook, you're my next speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Certainly respect my fellow councillors' view on this, asking for diversification and the parish council, but I too, like Councillor Took, not in favour of deferring. I think we're going to get ourselves really bogged down here on lots of figures. As Councillor Took said, we know what we know, what's gone before, but we don't know what's going to happen going forward. We can toss all the figures we like into the pot, but at the end of the day, it will be, as you said, David, guesswork. In essence, and I've had these on my patch as well, so I'm reasonably familiar having a rural patch. And always with the parishes, the headlines at every meeting. In fact, when I was at last night, most of the discussion was centred around highways, the traffic and the issues connecting with traffic on our rural roads, which are designed for carts, horses and carts. But recent years, we've seen a lot of diversification of these traditional rural activities. Many of them have benefited local communities, no question about that. And I commend those. And the movement of traditional agricultural vehicles is generally accepted as part of these traditional activities. You expect to see a tractor, even though they're giant things now, you expect to see those on a road, and you have to back down half a mile as I did recently on a single track road. So, but we accept them. They are part of the rural lifestyle. But where others have gone in, they're not quite so suitable. We've had what we might call the pebble effect. Got this operation here, which is fine in itself, it's a good thing. But the impact from it spreads and spreads and spreads. And whilst we're looking at what we've got here, we look at this application, I think the concern that's coming through in every case is what I call the pebble effect, particularly on highways and the outlying communities, with the increase in traffic and the type of traffic that we're going to see using this. And we don't know what it is. Private cars. Councillor Ward's comment actually about using an HGV for the, which was an excellent report, by the way, I will say that. Really first class report, and it was good to have the video, but it would have been nice to have had a higher view, certainly, to see how it works and the width. But anyway, it's good. So the impact on highways, particularly in affected communities, is likely to be spread across a much wider area with an operation of this type that I can see. The key is the management of an operation like this. As far as I can see, the management is likely only to focus on how things are controlled on site. Once vehicles leave to the public highway, there's no statutory duty for them to be controlled. And in fairness, there isn't, and why should there be? The highway is a public highway. So a vehicle, as we heard, I think, an HGV, for example, can use any route that it thinks desirable. Because what we have today is the ubiquitous sat-navs. And I know HGV drivers tend to use their own private phones or whatever for sat-navs rather than the industry one. So the private one will take them down on a route which is very totally unsuitable. We've had a lot of that through Dorset over recent years. And many people use just a sat-nav rather than local knowledge, which is likely to be less so with an operation like this, because they're going to bring people in, I think, from a much wider area. Thank you for quoting the MPPF. Actually, I leave that to colleagues, but there is in paragraph 105 quite a clear comment about focusing significant development to locations which are or can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel and offering a genuine choice of transport modes. It then goes on, so you can read it for yourself there. So, in essence, I wouldn't want this, because we're going to play out the issue more, so I think it's fairly clear what we've got here to work on. I think I'll leave it there, but perhaps I might like to come back later if you permit me, Madam Chair.
Jane, you're my next speaker.
Thank you, Chairman. I was enjoying actually indicated, but you beat me to it. Yeah, I've got a bit of a concern about deferring as well, because we haven't got a crystal ball as what's going to happen in the future. But I'd like some clarity from the officers. One of the objections from the parish council is that the application proposal does not involve carrying out industrial commercial activities. And we've had talk also today within this debate so far from the officers about self-storage. The intended for storage are massive, absolutely massive. And I'm just wondering, do we have any clarification about what the actual proposal is in terms of what is going to be stored on the site? If it is going to be commercial, which can apparently say that it's not, then presumably we're not going to have the HGV movements on the road infrastructure. If it's self-storage, then I'm not quite sure how it's going to be filled. It's a rural location, and the amount of car movements that's going to involve. So just like some clarity around that, because as I said, as both the previous speakers have said, we're not in any knowledge whatsoever of the future use of the road infrastructure concerning the storage site. But I just need that clarity. Is it going to be industrial or is it going to be self-storage?
Want to come back on that, please, Liz?
If I may, Chair, we do not have information to say either way, but we would anticipate maybe a mix. So that would be commercial storage.
I couldn't see it within the conditions. In terms of the storing of materials on the site, I just want a response from the officers about storage of hazardous materials on the site. What would be because I didn't see anything in the report and I didn't see any conditions on.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think we had this conversation in respect of a previous application where we explained that the storage of hazardous materials is covered by other legislation, so it wouldn't be appropriate for us to put on a condition as it wouldn't be necessary in this instance.
And that would be subject to further discussions and further planning applications for that. I think we did have this conversation quite as well last year, came with Serena.
I think the inference is that it doesn't come under the remit of planning, it comes under a different body. So it wouldn't be for us to now or in the future.
Yeah.
Do you have any other points?
Up for the members to carry on the debate at the moment, Madam Chairman.
I have no further speakers who have indicated to speak. Alex, you wish to come back?
If I can, Chair. Although I was supporting my colleague in seconding a case for deferral, there's a couple of points of it, right? One of which is that the video, for example, was taken on Monday, which was a glorious day. bright sunshine. There were no leaves on the trees. The verges hadn't grown. They were just sort of dull grass, as you'd expect in the beginning of a cold April. This whole area is totally different come June. When the leaves are on the trees, those lanes are shaded, the verges are full of bluebells and other wildflowers, particularly good verges for wildflowers. This is ecologically quite an interesting area. It varies from the valley round through, which is very meadow-like, and then onto the heath to the south. It is widely used by walkers. I mean, I admit I go there, I walk my dog through because you can walk those lanes quite safely on a quiet day. But what does concern me is the effect of traffic and different use on lanes and verges and hedges, which are all neatly clipped at the moment. They won't be for long. And of that extra traffic. When you look at Dorset is not short these days of diversified agricultural and other buildings which have become storage facilities. There's two I know of in my ward, one of which, actually three, one of which, fair enough, they have taken on one customer who uses it as a depot for agricultural machinery. It is 200 yards from the A31, easy. Another one is 200 yards from the A35, easy. They are not full. There is another one which is half a mile from the A31. They're still looking for tenants. I think the whole of this, without a sort of definite business plan, I am worried about what we are letting ourselves in for now, because I can imagine that if we agreed this, I mean, I know it's crystal balls and we can only look at what's in front of us, but I personally would recommend or would like to propose refusal on the grounds of detrimental effects on the environment in that area. I'm sure that's not the proper words, but I'm sure Phil can find something that works. We were told there was extra biodiversity. I cannot believe that one bat box makes up for what it may be lost. Thank you.
Okay, couple of points. First of all, you cannot propose a motion that is in direct conflict to something that's already on the table.
Okay, so we have to remove.
However, I will have to take the deferral first. If that falls, then you're welcome to come back with a proposal.
That's it, I was minded to.
Okay, David Morgan, you wish to speak? Put your hand up, I assume you want to speak.
Sorry. I was just gently stroking my fingers. Just following what Councillor Alex has just said, I think it's not a question of what it's going to be used for. It seems to hinge to me all around about the traffic and the effect it's going to have. I think that is seems to me to be the crux of the problem. I mean, situated where it is, and knowing what rural roads are like, with all the diversions that we now have in order to repair the roads, one is led in roads that one would never think one would drive down. So I think that is really, to me, what the crux of the problem is: effect on the environment and indeed the people that are living in the area. Leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, but I'm going to come back to you now. As you can see, I have a word in my ear.
Yeah.
From your comments, Alex, are you withdrawing your second motion to defer?
Chairman, if Councillor Brenton were to withdraw, my motion would fall for lack of a seconder. It's clear, I think, to me from looking around the table that it's not going to get through anyway. So she could, if she wished, simply withdraw the seconding of my proposal. And my proposal would then fall. I'm concerned that we ought to, I believe, take note of what local members ask for. I wish sometimes we would take that more seriously. And I was passing on that concern and that request. But if I can see the case against doing so and resolving the issue here and now. So if it would facilitate that if Councillor Brenton were to withdraw his seconding of my proposal.
Assume that's her proposal.
Well, if it is more efficient for the management of this committee for me to remove my seconding of the deferral motion, then I withdraw my support for the deferral motion.
Okay. So in light of that, I need to ask the rest of the committee, is there anyone else that wishes to second that proposal? In that case, that proposal falls. I'm now open to a new proposal, which Alex, you started to talk about. Would you like to now
Yes, I
a little more flavour around what you're proposing?
I would propose refusing this application on the grounds of God, I could have written down somewhere. The fact that I know you want a nice, clear phrase. I would say because it's not a sustainable position for a distribution hub, and the detrimental effect on the total environment, the biodiversity, and the amenity value, and the environment damage that it may cause. If you can make that into words.
Okay. Just checking to see that people are happy with.
There's nothing there about traffic, so we should be concerned about the traffic.
One of the big topics of debate has been about the traffic.
That's the sustainability bit.
Do you have a seconder?
And we need policies as well in the local plan that the council is referring to.
Ask, can you quote the policies in the local plan that you are referring to, please?
It was, I think Robin Cook found this before me. Is it a sustainable situation? Where will we go back?
The most likely culprit is paragraph 105 of the MPP.
Yeah, I think it is.
Chairman.
Yes, Robin, while Alex is looking.
Sorry, if it's the sound order, I apologise, but I was going to second the proposal, but I've got the reasons here, which are quite clearly defined in 1508 and 1509 of our report, which is centred around the APPF paragraph. I think from that is sufficient to refuse this application. Want me to read it to you?
I have it here. 1508. I think it's just for the benefit of everybody. Local objection is predominantly based on perceived inaccessibility of the site for a use which is associated with potentially significant trip rates. The MPPF paragraph 105 seeks to focus significant development to locations which are or can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel and offering a genuine choice of transport modes. The aim is reflected in Employment Policy E and Improving Accessibility and Transport Policy IAT, which requires development to be in accessible locations. It is acknowledged within the framework that opportunities to maximise sustainable transport solutions will vary between urban and rural areas, but the application site is particularly remote from any public transport and is served by unclassified roads. That's 1508. Paragraph 1509 goes on to say, the proposed BX storage or distribution use has not been further defined. The distribution use has the potential to be associated with significant vehicle trip rates. The site lies approximately 2.7 kilometres in the urban area and all routes to the site require travel along unclassified roads without pavements for at least 2.5 kilometres. Although the proposal would reuse existing buildings, the isolated location of the site weighs against its use for the nature and scale of the operation that is proposed. That, I think, encapsulates where you're coming from.
Definitely.
What is the sustainability? My next question, and there's been quite a lot of debate about the traffic movements. So I just would like some clarity, if I may, on whether or not you consider that the predicted movements are going to be. Sorry. So the sustainability, I've got that clear. Yeah. We've then got, you mentioned the environmental impact and the paragraphs. Given that this is a plan-led system, are there any particular policies in the local plan that you wish to refer to in addition to the NPPF? Thank you.
What plan is it? There's.
While Alex is still looking.
That's all about traffic.
Bill, you wanted to come back.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My concern is that this will fundamentally alter the local quality of life for the worse. That in sum is my principal concern. Is that covered in the wording that we've heard so far?
No, we need the next bit.
Does it amount to a sufficient reason?
Could you kindly leave them? I've got to for their own reasons.
Jane, I'm going to.
Madam Chairman, before we move to vote, I've got 2 further questions I wanted to ask, but just to let you know.
Ask those now because it may well impact on the fullness of the recommendation before us.
Thank you. First one was, I think we heard from one of our speakers about a collision with an individual who got injured, and I just wondered whether we had any collision data in the local road infrastructure. I'm sorry to put this on the spot, but I think it would be important to know whether there was any collision data or not.
Have you got a second question? Okay, Steve, can you answer that one?
As the highway consultant mentioned, they have analysed the accidents, or the collisions, I should say, rather than accidents. I did notice in a number of the objections that there was mentioned there were some shunts and scrapes, which are quite common, obviously on narrow rural roads. But collisions are what we're worried about with regards to injuries. I'm just looking at our Collision Explorer map at the moment, Councillor. We've had some puddle. Can't really give you too many details other than to say that has been considered. When we look at accidents, we're looking at cluster spots primarily. Is there an issue with the junction, for example? This application hasn't flagged up any issues at all. If the chair would want me to analyse the accidents I have in front of me, I do so. At the moment, I can say to you there to the west, have puddle on the B-class road. There are none in the immediate locality of the site within the last 5 years.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome back.
Second question. I think this listed this.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Jim. Obviously, there's been a lot of concern about the roads within the area and the narrowness of the traffic movement at Sunderland. As we've just heard, there isn't really any significant information in terms of collision data or what would perceived to be black spots within that local road infrastructure. But hearing the concerns of the local residents and in the 2 villages, I just wondered whether or not it would be possible through a section 106 agreement for a traffic regulation order concerning weight restrictions for Brian's Puddle 3 be put in place and paid for by the applicant. I agree that the signage that's being recommended would be inadequate, I think, to ensure the traffic moves in the directions which we want them to go, if that's not enforceable. My understanding is that a weight restriction would be enforceable. I know we've got it in Wimborne and it works extremely well. It would mean that HGVs can only enter into those 2 village areas that are actually delivering within the village, who wasn't able to get into the village and drive straight through. So the reason being for that is that it's unlikely to be an adverse impact on the local network, impact on the amenity of Brian's Puddle Group, and therefore an impact on the residents of villages which are constraining that road network within their curvages. So that's something I'd like to put forward, Madam Chairman, depending on how this vote goes, just to get an understanding from solicitors whether a Section 106 agreement for a traffic regulation order on Brian's Puddle through would be placed and paid for by the applicant through that Section 106. Thank you.
I get a response from Phil, please.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the grounds for imposing a traffic regulation order is to preserve or improve the amenity of an area through which the road runs. So there is a potential ground for that a traffic regulation order could be made in order for you to be able to resolve to grant permission subject to Section 106 regulation order to be put in place. You would have to be satisfied that it was necessary on grounds of amenity. I think, given the advice from Highways, that you'd have to be satisfied on amenity grounds that it's necessary to make the development acceptable. And in my view, the mechanism that you've just outlined require these for the process would mean that it had to be done through a Section 6 agreement rather than a condition. It's necessary to make development acceptable. It would still have to be if the order was not successful, then the development could be carried out without, say, further application.
Okay. Does that clarify matters for you?
It does, Madam Chairman. Yes, thank you. And I think highlighted within the report are some concerns within the curvature of the 2 villages, particularly with I think it's children waiting to go to school. Well, except the fact that there is a slightly wider road system through the village, nevertheless, it is still constrained. And I think it would be a benefit to the community. And I think it would be extremely important that if at the end of this debate we did grant it, then I could only support it if that Section 106 was put in place. Like it does benefit the amenity and the residents.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to our proposer. Have you been able to track down the policies you wish to refer to?
I would bring it back to NPPF, I think Section 180, that if significant harm to biodiversity resulting from development cannot be avoided at all, then planning permission should be refused. And this, part B is development on land within or outside a site of SSSI, which is only half a mile away, is likely to have an adverse effect. Not normally people. So I would bring it down to those 2.
You were asked about the local plan policies.
Local plan, I think
I suggest
B10, but I haven't got it up on my screen.
And IAT is the 2 policies. Oh, and policy D from the Purbeck local plan.
I haven't got a local plan up on my screen. I'll fish for it again.
Okay. So having had that clarification on the policies of the NPPF and the local plan, I'm going to first ask, are you happy to accept what's been said so far as seconder?
Ask a question, please, Chairman. Bearing in mind what Councillor Bucket said about the CRO.
I'll come back to this in a minute. I'm about the policies.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Let me come back to that in a minute. Okay, because the officers want to respond to what's been said about the policies.
If I may, Chair, so Councillor Brenton's just mentioned about environment and paragraph 180 of the NPF, but I don't think we would need, or I would encourage members to consider what evidence they have of harm to protected species or protected areas in order to justify adding that to the refusal.
I think you might be in a bit of difficulty on that one.
What harm?
That is what you need to.
Lack of air quality and lack of amenity and lack of and damage to wildlife habitats.
Welcome back.
Yes, please.
Members, I would just caution you that you have no evidence to support that. All the statutory bodies, Natural England, and the various consultees who advise us on wildlife have all said that they're satisfied with regarding the environmental impacts in relation to the impacts on habitat and biodiversity. I think that with regards to the sustainability argument that the members have advanced, I think officers could proceed on that basis. But in relation to paragraph 180, I would advise you against that. I don't think you have evidenced sufficient reason to demonstrate harm, and that's contrary to the advice that you've had from the consultees that we've consulted. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Mike Dyer. You haven't spoken yet.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been minded to support the proposal that's on the table as long as it sticks to the question of sustainability. I think if we get into environmental things or move towards traffic reasons, we're in unknown territory. So I would urge the proposer to stick to the sustainability issue.
Back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Dyer. If it is more secure to refuse on the grounds of sustainability, I am happy to waive my second paragraph.
Okay. So I think it would be helpful to have a recap of exactly what we have agreed. My understanding is that it is a proposal to refuse what's my notes then? Completely lost it. Yeah, Liz, can you help me? I can't read. I've written so many notes.
I can tell you what I've drafted, but please tell me when I've missed something. So I've got you taking from the paragraphs that were registered. Your site is an isolated, inaccessible and unsustainable location, which is not appropriate for storage and distribution needs associated with potentially significant trip rates. Traffic movements generated along single track country roads through Bryant's Puddle and Threepool result in an adverse impact on the environment and the immunity of residents, which is judged to outweigh the benefits of the scheme. The proposal is therefore contrary to policy COD, E and IAT of the Permanent Plan and MPPF paragraphs 183 and 105.
We certainly have 105 quoted.
Yeah.
That's sustainable location.
Sustainable transport. 180. The one I was pegging.
Remind us what paragraph 103 says.
So it's 18183. That's what I had down. So is that right?
I think it was
103, sorry.
105, I think.
105.
It was 105.
I've got 83, not 183. Sorry. That's why I got confused.
You just I haven't got the MPPF up in front of me. Can you just remind me what 83 is?
Councillor She mentioned about planning policy decisions to address and address specific location requirements for different sectors, and then talks at the end about in suitably accessible location.
Okay. So, bear with me a minute. We've been given a form of words. Are the proposer and seconder happy with that form of words for your proposal to refuse?
I am. As far as I can remember it.
Okay, I'm doing all this in stages so we all know where we are.
If we could get it on the screen, that would be brilliant, but I'm just trying to remember how I do it.
So we then have the issue of David Took.
I was first of all reminding you that your mic was off and others were on. But regarding paragraph 83, the important bit for me was the final clause, which is the storage and distribution operations to a variety of scales and in suitably accessible locations. And as I mentioned before, I'm not convinced this is a suitably accessible location. Thank you.
I think that's been covered in the policies that have been quoted.
Yeah, I just wanted to extend what the
Okay, so we now go back to Shane's request about a section 106. For a Okay, just so that people are aware, I don't like whispered conversations. The section 106, can't find the right word. I want to say proposal, but that's not right. The suggestion of a section 106 for a weight limit would only come into play if there was a proposal to grant. So therefore, as a proposal on the table is to refuse, you don't need to include it at the moment. Okay. Do I have any further speakers? In that case, it has been proposed and seconded to refuse, and you've all heard the long. I haven't got it on my screen. You have the words behind me. All those in favour to refuse on those words. And make that 6. Those against. 1. And there are no abstentions. Therefore, the application has been refused. If we're now going to take a 5-minute break because we've been going for 2 hours and we need it.
Say 5.
10.
Too few loons and too many people.
Too much information.
Moving on swiftly. Okay, are we ready to go live again? Okay, lovely. So thank you all for bearing with us on the first application. Next application is agenda item 8, which is 6/2021 0342 Swineham Lake, West Vestwall Road, where use of lake for recreational activities, namely outdoor swimming and retrospective sighting and shipping container to provide changing room facilities. Liz, you're going to take us through this one.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this application was originally on your agenda for the committee meeting in February that had to be deferred after it became evident that all the owners of the application site had been notified of the application. This has now been remedied and updates have been made to the report to reflect additional comments received, and those are in bold. So the site lies to the east of Wareham. And find my mouse here. Within the neighbourhood plan area shown here with the blue line. The lake was created for nature conservation following sand and gravel extraction, which took place during the early 1990s. The applicants began to operate open swimming sessions in May 2019, operating 3 2-hour sessions per week. Their application was received the same year, but has been delayed by the need for biodiversity surveys to demonstrate that the use can take place without harm to protected birds. During 2020, after COVID restrictions eased, they operated 2 2-hour sessions per week on Wednesdays and Saturdays, with a third session on occasion, another 2 hours on the Saturday. The use is not operated since September 2021, as they were waiting the decision on this planning application. So the site here outlined in red includes a bridleway, which is also a private drive that serves Swineham Farm and the Curlews, a dwelling to the south. Yeah. Concerns have been raised by owners of the bridleway about rights of access, but this is a matter of land law, which lies beyond the planning sphere. The bridleway is surfaced up to the point where the access heads north to Swineham Farm, as you see in this photo here. It then continues east as an informal track from which the lake can be accessed through the gate. Objections have been raised about conflicts arising with other bridleway users, but the limited width of the access and the small speed bumps encourage slow speeds, and there are refuges for walkers or riders. The use is proposed to operate for only 6 hours per week. To date, this has taken place in a maximum of 3 sessions. No harm to the safety of bridleway users has been identified. The impact of the property adjacent to the bridleway, the Curlews, which you see in this photograph here, is right on the bridleway. But the impact from additional vehicle movements is not judged to be materially significant so as to justify refusal. The council's right of way team has confirmed that the surface of the bridleway should be maintained by the owners to a standard that makes it suitable for use by riders. The right of the applicant to use the bridleway is a matter, again, which lies outside the planning system. It's proposed to continue to use the site adjacent to the access as an informal parking area. You see in this photo here, which I've kind of merged together so it's not quite representative. The number of vehicles would be limited by a cap on the number of swimmers at 25. The land is grassed and screened to the south and east by hedging. It's judged that the temporary use of the land for parking for approximately 6 hours per week can be accommodated without undue harm to the character of the AONB or the openness of the green belt. You'll see in this photo that the land was wet when these were taken. This was back in December, but the site does not lie within the flood zone and it won't be used in winter time. A container has been placed on the land which provides a reception and basic changing facilities. This is judged to represent an appropriate facility for outdoor recreation under paragraph 149, exception B of the MPPF, which due to its limited scale and siting avoids harm to openness and which facilitates access to the water by swimmers. You can see it in the photographs. It's of a modest scale and a dark green colour, and with the backdrop of vegetation, there is limited visual impact. The structure is visually recessive in the landscape. It's proposed to introduce further planting along the southern elevation down here to assist with visual mitigation, and this can reasonably be secured by condition, as can the removal of the container should the use cease. When the use has been in operation previously, a portable cassette toilet has been provided by the operator and positioned on the site for use by visitors. A condition has been proposed to ensure that any toilet facility is removed from the site outside of the seasonal use, but it has been, I have been reminded that one should not assume anything, and therefore it is suggested that the condition should be amended to require this ancillary facility and appropriate disposal away from the site. So I will provide you with some additional wording at the end of this presentation. As the proposed change of use won't introduce residential occupation of the site and the number of visitors will be limited, and many are also already likely to live within Poole Harbour nutrient catchment area, no adverse effects in respect of nutrient enrichment of Poole Harbour special protection area is anticipated. Just to show you that even in winter, the container is not really evident in view from the bridleway due to the hedging along the southern boundary. Confirmation has been received from Natural England that they are now satisfied that the breeding bird surveys undertaken for the site indicate that the use is not having a negative impact on protected species and the Poole Harbour Special Protection Area. The biodiversity plan that's been provided also intends to secure net gain for biodiversity. This is an extract from the plan, and it shows some additional back boxes where marked green with the green dots, some woodland management where there have been additional trees planted. There's some need for some work to them, and a turn raft has been proposed on the lake. The landowner's agreement has been obtained so that these can be subject to a condition. The House Martin Tower has also been proposed, which would be an excellent idea, but unfortunately this also would require separate planning permission. So Dorset Natural Environment team have confirmed that although it would be beneficial, the proposal without the House Martin Tower would remain acceptable. So in summary, subject to the imposition of conditions on pages 52 and 53 of your agenda and a modified condition 10, which you can see on this slide, which requires a portable toilet to be provided as well as removed. The proposal is recommended for approval as it represents appropriate development within the Greenbelt, enabling outdoor recreation whilst avoiding harm to biodiversity, harm to the character of the A1B and neighbouring amenity is also not demonstrably harmful. If permission is granted, then the applicant would need to apply to vary the planning obligation which was imposed on the land following the cessation of the minerals works, but that's a separate matter to this planning application. Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Far quicker than I expected. Okay, I'm going to now move on to our public speaking. There are some people in the gallery that weren't here when I did the initial introduction. So can I just remind you that this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting, and I will not take any interventions from the floor. Only those people who have registered to speak will be invited to address us this morning. And each speaker will be strictly limited to 3 minutes. And for this application, can I just check? Is Gordon Mutton in the room? But I was told that he had withdrawn his request to speak, so I just wanted to double check. So I have 4 speakers on this application, and the first one is Simon Patterson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I wrote to the committee on the 22nd of February, and that's what caused the delay. That was because we hadn't been involved in this application at all up to that point, and we made some simple points like what on earth is going to happen with the nitrates. This is a retrospective application. The damage done has already begun, in other words. We've studied the applicant's revised application, and these comments are in relation to that revised application. It fundamentally fails to account for the fact that the lake in which people are to swim is a designated conservation lake, which was designed by Slimbridge Wetland Centre in order to ensure support for the restoration of the quarry from which it was created. No quarrying would have taken place without that support. There was a huge amount of opposition to the quarry in the first place, which is why the planning was referred upwards to the Secretary of State for the Environment. The permission was not granted with a view to people swimming in the lake. It stipulated the guidance of and design by Slimbridge, who designed every aspect for wading birds with a view to the lake being wholly for conservation. We know this because we were the previous owners of Swineham Farm and Lake until 2008 and were formally subjected to all of the restrictions that I've just mentioned. They talk about pedestrian and vehicle access, roads and rights of way. Access is not via a public highway, as it states in the application. It's via a private road, over which access requires permission by those who have legal rights over it and for it. We as owners do not grant such permission. Vehicle parking is a huge issue. 20 cars twice a day, twice a week, 40 weeks is 3,200 car movements over a tiny private road used by pedestrians and residents only up to this point. Please note the last 2 hours of conversation that you've had about the previous application. Assessment of flood risk. It says it's not a flood risk zone. This is a flood risk zone. The answers given are wholly inaccurate. It talks about biodiversity and geological conservation. The applicant's answer, no, to the question, will protected and priority species be impacted by the proposals, is absolutely incorrect and in fact outrageous. This is a conservation lake and should still be treated and inspected as such. Allowing people to swim in this protected environment flouts the intention of the earlier and higher permission that was granted. House Martin Towers aside. They talk about foul sewage, 40 people coming and going daily, swimming in cold water, and nobody needs to use the lavatory. No comment. I would also remind you of the current concerns about nitrates going into Poole Harbour. No planning permission would be allowed in such a sensitive area without examination of possible mitigation at the very least. They talk about waste storage and collection. There is no plan in place, as far as I know, which will deal with the most sensitive issue of human waste and nitrates eventually pouring into Poole Harbour. Swineham lies directly next to an SSSI, and any effluent will have environmental consequences. Finally, hours of opening and ownership. Hours of opening, we are already subject to light pollution from Wareham Rugby Club. We object to plans for further light pollution. The applicant refers to the need for lighting and plans for evening use on Wednesdays. It is ridiculous to pretend that we as former owners and current owners of 180 acres next door to this property and with access to our mooring by way of the footpath at the end of Swineham Lane, which is what the road is actually called, should not have been consulted directly. We weren't.
Patterson, you are well over time now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I have, my next speaker is Cheryl Weeks.
Good afternoon. I think my time will be best used by answering some of the objections that have already been raised via letter, etc. Traffic, we restrict the numbers swimming in the lake to 25 per session. This means there's an absolute maximum of 25 cars travelling in the lane. In reality, a lot of our swimmers arrive on foot or on bikes, and those that arrive by car often car share. A local resident stated as part of his objection that sometimes there were more than 25 cars. However, he appeared to attribute every vehicle as being to do with us if it occurred during our session times, whereas in reality, many of these were not to the lake, but instead visiting other properties past the lake. It was further forecast by this and another local resident that the number of vehicle movements over the operating season to be around 5,000 on one objection and 7 on another. These figures were not backed up by any evidence. To clarify, I have extracted the actual number of swims for our last year of operation from NOCA, whose umbrella we operate under, and whose online booking system we use. In 2021, there were 890 individual swims, which even if every single person came in their own car, which as I mentioned simply doesn't happen, then that would still be only 1,780 vehicle passes during the course of the season, which whittles down to a maximum of 68 possible vehicle passes per week of operation. I would remind you that we only operate twice a week, for 2 hours on a Wednesday evening where we have no lighting because it's summer only, and for up to 3.5 hours on a Saturday morning from time to time. These figures are substantiated, and I have copies all 3 years of operation here should anybody wish to see them. One person expressed concern over the quality of the water at the lake and the risk of infection. We have had the water tested and it's extremely low risk with very low levels of bacteria and is classified as excellent. I have a copy of the test here if anyone should wish to see it. Nitrates and the risk to Poole Harbour. Some have mentioned that urinating in the lake could upset the level of nitrates in Poole Harbour. Firstly, as a swim session, it is usually only 1 hour or less, when most people don't feel the need to go to the toilet while swimming, and we use public toilets in town or go at home before arriving at the lake. In the past, as mentioned, we have used a cassette type portable toilet, which we took back home to empty, and would be happy to do that again if so required. A few expressed concern on the effect of wildlife, and in order to get a true picture, Natural England requested we commission an expert breeding bird survey to more accurately assess the impact. We had this done by a highly respected professional, and Natural England were happy that the survey showed there to be no appreciable disruption to native or visiting birds. In the past, the birds have always happily gone about their business whilst the swimmers are in the lake and pay them no heed at all, apart from the odd swan. Finally, the reason why we limit to 25 swimmers per session is firstly that all the car park we have designated for it will hold, and secondly, it's for the experience for the swimmers, many of whom seek a break from hectic home lives where everyone wants something from you, or from a stressful day at work, or maybe just more importantly, to escape from their own heads. With only 25 people in such a large lake, you feel like you're the only one in there. All you can hear is a gentle splash of your arms as you swim and the cries of the birds as they go about their business.
But I have to stop you there. You have run out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Despite the wonderful description.
I'm going to do a poem next.
And my next speaker is David Pratton.
Good afternoon. My name's Dave Pratton. I'm a retired head teacher and a local resident, having lived in Purbeck for the last 25 years. My initial training was as an ecologist. I have a degree in applied zoology and a diploma in fisheries management. I have published articles on various aspects of aquatic ecology in respected scientific journals. I learned to swim in the sea and have swum in open waters, lakes, rivers and reservoirs throughout the UK and Europe for over 60 years. It was through swimming that I encountered and developed a lifelong love of nature that endures to this day. Now in retirement, I work to protect nature whenever and however possible. I organise beach cleans, tree planting and hedge laying. I carry out butterfly monitoring. I give talks and advice on responding to climate change. Having witnessed numerous swimming sessions at Swineham, I believe they are safe, inclusive and well managed. Regarding the ecological impact, I note that the Swineham proposal has an approved biodiversity plan, and that Natural England are satisfied that the proposal is unlikely to cause significant effects on breeding birds of the Poole Harbour Special Protection Area. I would contend that not only has the activity not had an adverse impact on nature, it has actually enhanced it. The growth of open water swimming has brought more people in contact with nature, which in turn has created and fostered a greater interest in the health of our rivers, lakes and seas, as evidenced by the well-publicised campaigns against sewage pollution. It's no coincidence that the United Nations patron of the oceans is Lewis Pugh, an open water swimmer. As David Attenborough says, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. The Swineham Lake enterprise has encouraged more local residents to exercise in the outdoors, helping with their physical and mental health. The impact of mental health on mental health of open water swimming has been well documented, and it's noticeable that the majority of those using the lake are women, and in discussions with those users, they feel that it's a safe, inclusive place for them to exercise together, and has built up a community of open water swimmers who exercise throughout the Purbeck. Bird identification charts are displayed in the changing rooms, and this has resulted in swimmers expressing a greater interest in wildlife. And indeed, some have become campaigners in local nature recovery.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You have exceeded your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I was also given notification that the local member Ryan Holloway wished to join us. Is he online? No. Okay. So in that case, I shall go back to the officers. Are there any points that you wish to pick up from the public speaking? No, thank you. Okay, members, my first speaker then is Alex Brenton.
Thank you, Chair. I better admit that I have swum in the Swineham Lake once. This is not because I am a sea swimmer, an open water swimmer, and I thought, great, this is a site that is not tidal. I went there and I can agree that I'm not a member of the management committee. I only swam there once because they're too good. They swim fast, they swim determined, they are practicing for triathletes and things. This is not somewhere where you just go to splash about. There's no splashing about in the shallows here. This is in, swim, out. That's about all I can say.
Thank you. The next speaker is Shane Bartlett.
First pleasure out of that. First question, Madam Chairman, is let's talk about the road and the car park. I just wondered who was responsible for the upkeep and the ongoing maintenance and costs of that. We were told it was a private road, and the car park was with additional traffic movements close to that, going to be detrimental to that road surface.
Through you, Chair. So the bridleway is to be managed, and that is managed by the owners. That's how bridleways operate. The council's rights of way officers would only get involved if the surface of the bridleway meant that it could no longer be used for that purpose, say by horses and riders. That answers the question.
The car park.
The car park, because it's an informal area for parking, that again would be the operator of the swimming sessions would be in charge of making sure that works, and the owner of the land is ultimately responsible for ensuring that there's no damage.
How would that be monitored, and what sort of time frame, what was the timetable of that monitoring be, and who would actually assess it?
Chair, there's no suggestion of monitoring because it's the owner's responsibility to look after their land. The legal agreement, if that's what you were referring to in a way, the legal agreement currently requires that the land is used for nature conservation. And if the committee is minded to grant approval, then it would be for the applicant to apply to have that varied so that it could be used for nature conservation and the swimming. And as far as I'm aware, there's no requirement within that legal agreement for the land to be kept in a particular manner, as long as it is kept available for conservation.
Does that answer your questions? It sounds as though it's outside of our remit. David Turk.
Thanks, Chair. The concern I think expressed around the route is that this is a site for nature conservation. We have water birds that are going to be using it. Do we know, this is a retrospective application, but do we know what species of birds actually use the lake, what breeding pairs there are on the lakes and what the results are? And do we know if this has changed since swimming started in the lake? I just want to get a feel for if there has been an effect on the water birds using the lake. In what's it, how many years has this been going on?
Really, Chair. So I think I explained at the start. I'm just going to have to go back to my slide. Apologies. I think it was this one. Yes. So it was the use first began in May 2019. It's basically operated for about 3 years, but hasn't operated for the past year. During those 3 years, the applicant has undertaken species and the I think what it's called basically the evidence that Natural England required was to demonstrate what the site's being used for and how the swimming had influenced the birds, and particularly the breeding birds. And Natural England have looked at the report that was provided and are satisfied that there is not a significant impact on the breeding birds.
That's evidence supplied by the applicants rather than independent evidence by Natural England or SPB or something like that.
Yeah, the applicants paid for a consultant to do the work. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Wild swimming, wild camping, and even wild toileting, they've become fashionable events in the 21st century, so I believe, and they have in certain areas, certainly in Dorset, caused innumerable problems. I won't say which one causes more problems than the others, but they certainly have. I don't really get an answer from the top table here, but I'll ask the question. Do we know whether wild swimming would have taken place on this site before this organisation was involved, this club? And I'd like to come back there.
Can't say for certain, but I'm not aware of any wild swimming having taken place, but people may well have jumped the gate, I suppose. But the owner has authorised the current use, whereas I'm not aware of any previous authorised use of the lake.
As I said at the beginning, there's no further intervention from the public. I apologise.
If I may then, thank you, Madam Chairman, come back. Well, no, my point here is that then we've got a situation here where it could happen anyway. Now we've got a possible situation, well, it's retrospective, but we've got a situation where it's happening, but it's controlled. There is a degree of management in place to protect what is going on there, including the wildlife, the ecological structure. So I think that's something to consider as we go through the debate. I'm not coming with any proposal at the moment, but I think those points, if it could have been used before, okay, which it sounds as if it could have been, being used now and likely to be used if it's approved, fully managed. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Madam Chairman. I've got two other points I'd like to make. We'll get to, should this be subject for approval? I just want to visit condition 10 that we've got within the report, which I'd just like to feel strengthened and quite strong enough.
Shane, before you go to that, remember the slide that's on show at the moment, 11, has got a revised wording for condition 10.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Officers sort of preempted me, although I wonder whether the word shall should be replaced with should. I wonder if that's stronger.
You'd have must.
It's not legally, it's not stronger.
I think we've raised you by the word must.
It must. Where's must?
So, you know, must be. One portable toilet must be available. That's the suggestion, is to change it from shall to must.
I beg your pardon. Yeah, certainly. Okay. Yeah. Go to my second point. Okay. So reading through the report, I noticed that the officers are saying that at 15.29 on page 49, a temporary 5-year approval needs to be justified. and I appreciate the fact that it's been swimming for some considerable time on the site now. But I did take into account that at 5.2, the initial site was originally to provide a wildlife habitat, and at 15.29, Section 106 agreement, the mineral extraction planning permission required that the lake and surrounding area is to be used for nature conservation in perpetuity. And what we're seeking to do now is slightly change the use of the lake, and that's going to be through an legal agreement. Companies got to sign up to the legal agreement's got to be changed. But at page 40 at 2, Dorset Wildlife Trust objectives, and also at 4, Dorset Council Natural Environment Team further assessment of bird populations was requested by them. And 7, the Wareham Town Council have obviously expressed concerns about the wildlife impacts. I think when you take all that into account, Madam Chairman, and also taking into account 15.31, 15.32 and 15.33, which I think are of significant importance regarding the conservation and protection of wildlife, then I could only support this application if there was an amendment to it to say that it would be a temporary 5-year approval. And I think the justification for that, I think, is backed up. I don't think that we can satisfactorily rely on the present surveys that have been done on the bird population. I think we need to be far more stronger on that and have an ongoing brief over that as the Central Planning Authority, because we know that wildlife habitats can deteriorate very, very quickly. And I think bringing a 5-year temporary approval to use the site would give us the necessary strength to keep a watch over that site going forward. Thank you.
I will ask for an officer view on the temporary permission, and I'll go back to Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So temporary use hasn't been recommended by officers because the use has already operated for those 3 years, and because so since the original objection raised by Dorset Wildlife Trust and England, the applicant has submitted the bird breeding surveys conducted in April and May 2022, and that has satisfied Natural England that the swimming use isn't causing significant effects. So I appreciate the suggestion that things change, and but I think from the amount of information that we have at the moment, the effects of the development can be clearly understood, and it's not anticipated that planning circumstances would change. Were the applicant to seek to increase the number of sessions or change the manner in which they're operating, or change the number of people who are coming to the site, all of that would require a new planning application, which would then be within the council's control. So that's why at the moment the officers have not recommended a temporary consent. Thank you.
Want to come back, Shane?
Thank you. With the greatest respect for the officer, I hear what she says, but I cannot agree. I don't believe that we should, as an authority, abdicate responsibility over this. I think in all consciousness, myself as a member, looking at what the site was originally intended for, which was a nature and conservation site for wildlife, I think that in all consciousness, I can't just abdicate responsibility on that. And I think putting a 5-year temporary approval permission on this would, as I say, strengthen the council authorities to keep a watchful eye and to manage and monitor the site going forward. And I don't even mind going forward. We can't impose this on the future planning committee, as so that was a 5-year rolling agreement. I'm not proposing that now, but I think I will move to a proposal to accept the commissioner grant subject to all conditions, and also to add in that it would be a temporary 5-year approval. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so if you're proposing that, is there a seconder? Robin Cook, do you wish to speak to the proposal?
Yeah, just to clarify again, can we, the 5 years, that from approval date or from the 3 that's already gone?
It would be from the approval date.
Fine, so if it's approved, it would have been in evidence then for 8 years, basically. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to second on that basis.
Don't see any other speakers. In that case, we have a proposal for a 5-year temporary permission. with all the other conditions as per the recommendation in the report, with an updated condition 10, which you can see on the screen behind me. All those in favour, please. 3, 6. Okay. Those against? And abstentions? 1. Okay, therefore the application is granted as a 5-year temporary permission. So if it works well, then you can come back and apply again. Yeah, just been reminded, members, that we are coming up at 1 o'clock to our 3-hour limit. We still have 2 further applications to deal with this morning, or this afternoon, I should now say. So the first thing I need from you, do you wish to continue past 1 o'clock and deal with these last 2 applications?
Yes, Madam Chair.
I propose we do.
The second question is that we have speakers on every application. So do you wish to proceed on to the next application now, which would take us to just beyond 1 o'clock? Or do you want a quick 5-minute break now? And please, it would have to be 5 minutes. I'm in your hands, members.
Continue, Madam Chairman.
We've already had 1 break.
Yeah.
The next.
Okay, fantastic. Right. In that case, we will move straight on to agenda item 9. I will try and speak very slowly to allow people to swap over the various technical bits. So agenda item 9 is 6/2021/0262 Withy Lakes at Church Knoll, and that's to erect a detached self-build rural exception site dwelling. And we wait with bated breath. Harry's going to take us through this one.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Sorry if you can everyone later. So this application is in outline form for the erection of a detached self-built rural exception site dwelling on the plot of land to the south of the bungalow known as Withy Lakes in Church Knoll. All details of the layout, scale, access, appearance and landscaping are reserved for later approval. Members may recall considering this application at the Planning Committee in March 2022. The committee resolution then was to grant planning permission subject to conditions and also the completion of a Section 106 legal agreement, and this was to secure the provision of the affordable dwelling in perpetuity. The legal agreement was completed on the 18th of May 2022. However, in the interim, Natural England provided updated advice to the council, which introduced a requirement for nutrient neutrality of new residential development within the Poole Harbour catchment. The application has since been held in abeyance to enable the applicants to address nutrient neutrality. It is now returned to committee today with additional details in respect of the securing of nutrient neutrality and also an update to the housing delivery test and an amended officer recommendation. As the application has been previously considered, I will provide a brief summary of the former considerations before addressing a new housing land supply position and the securing of nutrient neutrality. The application site is located to the south of Church Knoll village, approximately 1 mile to the west of Cork Castle. You can see the application site outlined in red here, and the surrounding land within the same ownership is in blue. The access into the village is also outlined in red. The key designations affecting the site are the Dorset Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty and also the location of the site within the countryside. The site is located to the south of the existing bungalow known as Withy Lakes and also a stable conversion located to the north. It's well screened by existing trees and hedgerows and is gently sloping from south to west. So here's just some photos of the site which you will have seen previously. So the site itself is top left photo there, and you can just see the boundary with the Withy Lakes bungalow fence and boundary. And then some photo bottom left of the access lane down to the application site. Top right is the existing stables conversion, and bottom right is the existing bungalow of Withy Lakes. So the application site is in the countryside, and members may recall a number of objections were received to the proposed development and its siting outside of the village settlement. However, the proposal for a rural exception site dwelling remains in accordance with both national and local planning policy, and officers consider that the proposal remains acceptable within the country. So the completed legal agreement means that the proposal is fully compliant with policy RES of the Purbeck Local Plan and also the Purbeck Affordable Housing SPD, as was previously resolved by the committee. In support of the application and the related viability assessment, the applicants have submitted a number of indicative drawings. However, I remind members that all details will require future approval as part of a reserved matters application. The application has previously been found acceptable in relation to other planning issues, including the impacts on the ONB, highways, flood risk, drainage, trees, and biodiversity, subject to a number of conditions which remain in your report. So since the application was last considered by the committee, the council is no longer able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply for the former Purbeck area. However, no adverse impacts have been identified that would outweigh the benefits that the dwelling would contribute to affordable housing supply. An appropriate assessment is required in accordance with the habitats regulations to enable full consideration of the proposed development and any likely adverse effects on the integrity of the Dorset Heathland sites and nutrient neutrality in Poole Harbour. The conclusion of the previous appropriate assessment was superseded by the new advice from Natural England that was provided in March 2022 in relation to development proposals that have the potential to affect water quality, resulting in adverse nutrient impacts on the Poole Harbour catchment. So the existing strategy for nitrogen neutrality is set out in the nitrogen SPD, and we've been advised this continues to apply to new dwellings. However, as no strategy exists for phosphorus neutrality, applications are required to demonstrate through an appropriate assessment that appropriate measures or safeguards are in place to ensure phosphorus neutrality in perpetuity and to enable the grant of planning permission. So the applicants for this application have sought a bespoke approach to secure nutrient neutrality of the scheme. They propose the replacement of an existing old septic tank serving the existing bungalow of Withy Lakes with a new wastewater treatment plant for Withy Lakes and also a new treatment plant for the new dwelling. A site-specific nitrogen and phosphorus calculation note has been prepared and submitted to the council, and this confirms a net overall reduction in nutrient loading to the water environment. An appropriate assessment has been undertaken on the basis of the details included in the nutrient calculation, and this concludes that there would be a net overall reduction in nutrient load into the water environment. As a result, there would be no adverse impacts on the Poole Harbour catchment, subject to securing the treatment plants in perpetuity by way of a supplemental Section 106 legal agreement. Natural England have been consulted on the appropriate assessment and the measures to be included in the legal agreement, and they have raised no objection. So in summary, the proposal is considered to remain acceptable and in accordance with national and local planning policy. The application is outline only, and details of the dwelling's appearance, scale and layout will be considered by way of a future reserved matters application. A legal agreement has already been completed to secure the provision of the affordable housing in perpetuity in accordance with the March 2022 committee resolution. And the officer recommendation remains one of approval, subject to the completion of a supplemental legal agreement to secure the nutrient neutrality in respect to the Poole Harbour catchment. Thank you, Chair.
Very much. I have two public speakers on this application. The first one is on behalf of the applicant, Tom Smith.
Thank you very much. Sorry to press this button. Thank you very much for listening to me today. Yeah, as Carrie's just pointed out, we brought this application to you last March, and it was approved by planning committee, and then 7 days later Natural England changed their advice, so we've had to wait on Natural England to give us some sort of guidance on how we can meet their nutrient neutrality advice, and we've done that now, and my family and I are just sort of hopeful that you will come to the same conclusion today, so we can finally get out of our parents' house and into our own home and build this house, and hopefully that, as you've seen, the new measures will be acceptable. They were to Natural England, and really I just came here today just to put a face on the application so that you can see that we're in need of this housing, and we've taken a 47% sort of valuation, so a 53% reduction on its value. So this house will be affordable in the village in perpetuity forever. So not only it will provide us and my family with a home, but it will provide affordable housing in the village. So it'll be a great asset to the village too, for forever. So that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sometimes you don't need lots of words. My next speaker is local board member Jerry Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this matter again. As you've heard, the application was approved and put on hold due to the Poole Harbour mitigation requirements. Since then, the applicants have been very proactive in finding a solution to the environmental considerations. A new drainage system has been designed, which has been approved by Natural England and our officers. This has been a tortuous process for the applicants through no fault of Dorset Council, but I think we need to move on now that we can. I'd also ask you to consider that the 47% cap on resale shows that there is a huge amount of effort and no resale profits. So it shows how committed they are to providing this home as a residential exception sign, the principle of which has already been established. Since the Parish Council submitted their comments on the original application, there's been a change in several of their councillors. Churchnall Parish Council held an extraordinary meeting on Monday of this week, which I attended. I can confirm that their vote was not to speak in opposition of this application today. So, members, I am really quick today. I strongly support this application and ask you to reaffirm the approval that you gave last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I will ask the question. Are there any points that officers wish to respond to? Okay, members. David Took.
Affordable housing is a great benefit, and I think it's a valuable thing for this to do. And 47% of the market value sounds good. I'm just a little wary because we've sat in this room where Section 106 agreements have been provided and then later not been followed through because of viability issues. Are there any grounds for thinking that there could be such viability issues popping up with this application that would then remove that affordable housing agreement? I hear it's a Section 106 agreement, but it was only a couple of weeks ago we had one of those overturned. So I just want some reassurance as to what this Section 106 agreement in affordable housing actually amounts to. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. In this instance, members, it's based on need rather than on viability, say. So the purpose of the Section 106 is to keep the dwelling as an affordable dwelling. And that would be based on the terms and conditions set out in the 106 that meet the criteria. And if the people that you were minded to go on consent for change, that be the outcome. But any subsequent people would have to meet the tests for the occupation of the unit.
Wish to come back?
Mate, I hear that, and I'm reassured to a great degree. I'm just wondering if you are aware that there may be potentially grounds in a few years' time for this no longer to be affordable housing. And because it's a rural exception site, it can't be built unless it's affordable housing. So I'm just nervous and wary that at some point down the line, there will be grounds to stop it being affordable housing. Now, if I can be reassured that such grounds can't exist, then I'd be very happy. Otherwise, I'd be a little worried. Can we just clarify that?
I'm going to get a legal view on this for you.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is the case where we can never say never because we don't know what the circumstances will be in the future and we don't know what the development plan will be in the future. If the rural exception site or other policy changed so that were you considering a new application against a policy framework which didn't require the site to be affordable housing, then I could see an application coming forward on that basis, but it would be on the same basis that were you considering it afresh, it wouldn't be restricted. So I can't give you any guarantees that we would never receive an application and it could never be granted. But all I can say is with the policy framework as it is at the moment, you would, if an application came in against that policy framework, you'd be applying the same judgments that you are now.
That give you the answer you were looking?
More or less, I'm getting what I interpret that legal opinion to mean is that all things being equal, if policies remain the same, then it would have to remain as affordable housing. If policies changed, then we've got a new scenario. But
we can't even go there. We don't even know.
No,
what
we don't know what
policies might be.
No, if policies change, then policies change. That's understandable. But all things being equal and policies remaining the same, then this would remain as affordable housing. Is that what we're saying? Mm. Yeah. Thank you.
Dane.
I'm Chair. Thank you for an excellent report. I'm going to ask the question, it's just in the public domain. I know it's already laid out in the report, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, important aspect of this was about the nitrogen and nutrient neutrality for the Poole Harbour catchment area. So, similar questions to the officers. I mean, we laid out in the report, I just want to ask it in public, is that the officers are satisfied that this planning application now meets those requirements?
Yes, officers are satisfied, subject to a legal agreement to ensure that the requirements are met in perpetuity, that the proposal satisfies the requirements for nutrient neutrality.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think on that basis, and that was the overriding question for me surrounding this application. So on the basis of that, and the fact that we're in a situation where the Purbeck area isn't meeting its housing delivery needs only at 76%, obviously it brings in compliances and concerns as well. And that when we read through the report, the Dorset Council Housing Enabling Team got no objection, Highways no objection, the Land Drainage no objection, Natural England no objection, and so it goes on. And now that we've heard from the ward member who's in favour of it, I understand, and her valuable information, the parish council is now not minded to object to it. On all of that basis, Madam Chairman, I would propose that we grant subject to the officer's recommendation and conditions as laid out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just double checking. Had in one part of the agenda the fact that it was a split recommendation. Just trying to jump to the end, just to confirm it. So yes, it is a split recommendation in the report to grant with a variety of conditions. And the flip side to that is to refuse if the legal agreement, section 106, is not completed by the 5th of September, which is 6 months from today, or such extended time as agreed by the service manager. So proposing double the grant, but with the backstep of refusal if the section 106 is not signed.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? I'll take David Morgan.
Happy to second. Thank you, Madam Chair.
David Moore.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I'll give David the benefit.
Spoke to him.
I was looking at both of you. So, duly proposed and seconded as per the officer recommendation. Those in favour, please. I make that unanimous. Therefore, the application is granted. Okay. We have one item left, agenda item 10. That's PFUL 2022-06807. That is for April Cottage at South Instow, Harmons Cross, Swanage. To sever the plot and erect a 4-bedroom detached house. I'm trying to I'll hand over to Liz as soon as it's loaded to take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this final item from officers is regarding April Cottage and proposal for a new dwelling. The site is located in the Harmons Cross settlement between Corfe and Swanage. April Cottage is a residential dwelling currently also offering bed and breakfast. It lies relatively centrally within the settlement, which is all within the Dorset AONB. The land drops to the south, to the valley, and also to the east. So the site has views across the valley, but there is also a large protected pine tree on the site. The proposal is to introduce a new dwelling with an attached garage on the garden of April Cottage shown here. Right? The main considerations as set out in the officer report are the impact on the character of Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty, the protected tree and neighbouring amenity. There is a presumption in favour of sustainable development, as you've just heard from Carrie, so approval should be granted unless clear harm to assets of particular importance are identified or the adverse impacts of granting permission will demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Here we see as the site context and the level changes, which mean that April Cottage is below the level of the highway. Vegetation provides boundary screening. April Cottage has a garage and a parking space to the south, shown here, and neighbouring properties then are also on lower land. This is going down the hill. We've got Woodstock here, and then Foxglove Cottage below. And these properties are arranged over 2 stories to maximise views, although they often appear as single story from a certain elevation. The property design is 2-story in this instance, but references the low eaves and the gable features of existing dwellings on the locality. Herbeck stone and plain clay roof tiles are considered to be appropriate materials in this location. The street scene provided illustrates how the ridge height of the dwelling will be about 1.2 metres higher than April Cottage. It can be accommodated on the site without harm to the character of the street scene. Concerns have been raised by the Parish Council and neighbours about light spill arising from the hillside position and the extent of the glazing shown on the rear elevation that you see in this slide. 4 bedrooms are shown at first floor level and each has full height glazing and a Juliet balcony. However, with additional the retention of the fir tree and due to the site's context within the settlement, your officers haven't identified likely harm to the character of the AOB A and B in this instance. An informative note would be used to encourage the use of curtains blinds by future occupants. The separation distances that you see here between properties are considered to be generous in keeping with the area's character. Officers have assessed the potential for overlooking and overbearing impacts that have been raised as concerns by objectors. The relationship with Fairfields to the east is acceptable. That only has one first floor window facing east. The new dwelling has one first floor window facing east, which can be conditioned to be obscure glaze that serves bathroom. There will be modest overlooking of the proposed property from the existing angled window that you see in the photo here, but it's but the relationship is considered to be acceptable across the garden as is existing. Woodstock and its garden is on lower land, and that's to the south. And the change in land levels is likely to accentuate the visual impact of the two-storey property for the occupiers of that dwelling. However, the main visual impact will be experienced in the lower part of the garden away from the house. With the proposed additional boundary planting, which can be secured by condition, and due to the separation distances, no demonstrable harm has been identified that would warrant refusal. Concerns have been raised by the Parish Council and neighbours about the relationship of the property with the protected tree on the site. This tree contributes to local amenity and will provide some screening of the rear elevation. The Council's tree officer has confirmed that the building can be constructed without harm to the tree rooting area. Careful consideration has been given to the relationship of the dwelling to the tree, which is mature and shows signs of decline. On balance, in light of the age and the condition of the tree, it's been judged that a reason for refusal could not be sustained. Tree works were approved in 2020 to remove some crossing limbs and thin out the canopy to encourage regeneration of the tree. The design of the building with significant glazing on the southern elevation will ensure that occupiers receive sufficient light in the future, limiting the likelihood of pressures for reduction or removal. The dwelling will use the existing access serving April Cottage off Instow Crescent. Yeah. 2 parking spaces are to be retained by April Cottage for bread and breakfast guests. The occupants have their own parking area to the south. And the new dwelling will be served by a double garage and a turning space here. The highways team have raised no objections to the proposal, and a condition will be used to secure parking provision for the dwelling. So subject to the conditions set out on pages 106 onwards of your agenda, approval is recommended.
Thank you very much. I have 3 public speakers on this application. The first one is Karen Beach.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Beach and I'm the planning agent for the house. Planning application is for a 4-bed, 2-storey house on land to the east of April Cottage. The application site is within the settlement boundary of Harmons Cross, and the principle of development is therefore acceptable. There have been no objections from any statutory consultees apart from the Parish Council. They have objected based upon light impact and light pollution on the immediate and wider area, and also impact on the Monterey pine, which is located along the southern boundary of the site. The house will not have an adverse impact on the landscape character of the AONB. The site benefits from some tree and vegetation screening, and light spill will only be seen in the context of existing properties. The Monterey pine will be retained and protected during the development. The house has deliberately been designed with large glazed areas to maximise light and passive solar gain from the south-facing aspect and to offset any overshadowing from the tree. This will ensure that the pine tree does not come under pressure to be felled in the future. There has been no objection from your tree officer. Development will not harm protected wildlife species. A biodiversity plan was submitted with the application, which sets out the way in which wildlife mitigation and enhancement will take place. Natural England has considered the application and has not objected. Care has been taken with the design to ensure that there is no overlooking of neighbouring houses. During the application process, the first floor rear balcony that extended the width of the house has been replaced with Juliet balconies in response to overlooking concerns from the neighbours. The access is as existing, and there is sufficient car parking for both the new house and April Cottage with its use as a B&B. The application complies with all local plan and national planning policies. We therefore respectfully request that members support the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission for the development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mrs. Burry.
Dear councillors, dear councillors, I am the applicant. I have been living in Harmons Cross since the time my parents, Barbara and Peter Weaver, bought April Cottage in the 80s. I've always considered the Isle of Purbeck my home and have been an active member of the community for many years. The prosperity of Harmons Cross has always been in my interest. I was one of the initiating persons to reduce the speed to 30 on the A351 through Harmons Cross. Together with my husband, we have been running our successful bed and breakfast business for 12 years. It has brought many happy guests to our area and helps drive the local economy. One of our unique selling points is our Monterey pine tree, and we've always taken great care of this landmark. Our architect took utmost care in their design to respect the boundaries of this protected tree. Before submitting our planning application, we sought pre-application advice from the council to gauge the likely reaction. We were pleased with the positive outcome and have taken on board all constructive comments given. The design was then amended accordingly. Before the official publication on the DCC planning website, we informed our neighbours by showing them plans. During the application process, we received some comments from our neighbour, which were taken on board. For example, we changed the first floor balcony to a Juliet balcony. We understand there's a planning condition which seeks obscure glazing on the east side of the house, which we of course accept. Equally, we accept the condition requiring the landscaping scheme, which will help to strengthen the boundary planting. My husband and I strongly believe that together with the architects and the planning consultants, we have created a unique house which will fit perfectly in the area and will be an asset to South Instead. Thank you for your valuable time.
Thank you. Bang on the dots. First and last speakers almost, but we have one more speaker. Councillor Brooks, you are the local member. Do you wish to speak on this? That's okay, that's fine. Not a problem. So, fine, we have no more public speakers. Is there anything officers wish to come back on what's been said? No? Okay, members. Alex.
Please, Chair, I missed it, but can we go back to the south, the slide that shows the south-facing facade, the south side of the house, because there's comments about large areas of glass and reflections and possibly light pollution at night. So just hang on, What do you classing as the front and the rear, I suppose?
If I am.
The rear one is the south facing side?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any conditions, just, there's a condition about obscure glasses, are there any conditions about the high level blinds on the roof lights?
Through you, Madam Chair. No, in this instance, it wasn't considered necessary. It's very difficult to enforce these conditions with blinds, and therefore the proposal here was, given that officers haven't identified demonstrable harm, was to put an informative note on to remind future occupants that this is an area of outstanding attributing. The use of blinds and curtains is recommended, but that wouldn't be something that we could enforce. Thank you.
Can I just ask or check, is this an area that, does this parish have a dark skies policy at all? I mean, it's quite close to Swanage, so I can't imagine it's a bit awkward, but just ask.
Madam Chair. That when you look at the different areas within the A1B, there are characteristics that are identified, but the areas are quite large. And in this instance, we're looking at a development like this within the settlement. So although if you were looking at an isolated dwelling within this area, the A1B, you might be far more sensitive to the light that's being emanating, as it were. In this instance, because of the context of the settlement, the dark night skies becomes less of an issue. Thank you.
Next speaker is Bill Tribe.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask the officers, do we know how many nearby plots have received similar severing and new build treatment in recent times? I'm trying to establish whether this is a first one or one of several in a process over time.
I'm afraid I'm unable to provide you with that information. This is a severance plot, yes, but there's nothing obvious around to help me to answer your question.
Right. I'm not necessarily against it. It's just that in Swanage, this process has been carried forward in one or two areas, and over a significant period of time, it has arguably adversely affected the character of an area. Now, I'm not saying this would have the same effect in this particular place at this particular time, but if it were the first in an area, it could set a trend that would, in the fullness of time, be considered adverse. On the other hand, it might be the latest in a series. I suspect, knowing South Instow a little, it is not. But anyway, I don't want to start to suggest that we should not accept this, but I would venture that one word of concern for the longer term.
Get where you're coming from, but I think that's beyond our remit today. Jen.
Madam Chairman, just a quick questions. I think it's the Woodstock property, which is lying obliquely to the proposed application. I got that. I think it's the Woodstock one. Yeah. I just wondered what the distance was from that oblique glazing to the property. I think we've got it in the report. The meterage to the boundaries, the garden boundaries, the meterage between. I just wondered what the meterage was actually from that oblique window to the Woodstock building.
Thank you, Chair. I can tell you it's more than 18 metres because that's to the 18 is to the boundary, and then you're going beyond the boundary. And also Woodstock is at an angle, so the windows in Woodstock look down the valley.
Yeah.
So there isn't that into the potential for interlooking, as it were. But I'm afraid I can't give the immediate distance. I think it's about 30, but that's a guess.
Thank you. I realise it's an oblique angle to it, so it's just, quite a significant distance then, so I'm content with that. And just a quick question on, no, there's no anticipated problems with future waste and rubbish curbside collection on this property?
The Madam Chair, no, for a single dwelling, that there's place to put the bins.
It did appear from the maps that it was within sufficient manageable distance to be able to take the curbside collection. Madam Chairman, have you got any other speakers?
Not at the moment.
Okay, in that case, Madam Chairman, excellent report again, as all the reports have been, which is very difficult sometimes to get again to ask a question around it because all the information's there in front of you on the page, which you're all getting too good at it, which is getting a bit frustrating for us members. So I think, Madam Chairman, on the basis of what's been put in front of us, that there are no objections to, very few objections actually from the consultees. And the fact that, as I understand it, with this cottage being lower at the road level, it's 1.2 metres, I think, above the April cottage. So it's not going to have a significant impact from the road scene, the amount of vegetation around, which is also on the screen there. Subject to conditions that are laid out, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to propose to grant as per the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, do I have a seconder? David, do you wish to speak on this?
Yeah, only to add, Madam Chairman, that where there have been objections, I feel that the applicant has, in actual fact, tried to overcome them. For example, the balcony, which was a concern, now I can understand overlooking, has now been reduced to the Juliet balcony. And I think even the light problem has been looked at. So I think they've tried to, fit in with any complaints that I've had or any possible objections. So I think in view of that, yeah, I'd like to second it.
Thank you. So it's been proposed and seconded to grant as per the officer recommendation. Those in favour, please. Five in favour. Those against? 1. And abstentions? None. So has been granted. Okay, members, going back to the main agenda before us today. Item 11 is urgent items. You'll be pleased to know there are none. And exempt business, again, there is none. So at 1:29, according to my computer, meeting is closed. Thank you very much for your